From the craftsmen who build Dutch clogs the same way they were made for over 800 years, to the pasta makers behind an ancient Indonesian noodle dish still served today, we met the artisans whose rare professions take a lifetime to master.
A pair of clogs starts with a fresh block of wood from a willow or poplar tree. It doesn't weigh much when it dries.
When you have a hardwood, it's also heavy. So when it's finished, it should be you have a lot of kilos on your foot.
Martin makes sure to avoid any knots in the wood, like this new branch forming.
So it's not good. Get a hole in the shoe afterwards.
He then chops out the rough shape of a shoe. Martin is a 4th generation clog-maker, and he still uses the axe his father gave him when he was 12. The blade's handle is curved to help protect his hand.
When it's straight, it will cut your fingers.
But he still has to be careful. If he cuts too much, then he has to start all over again.
Has that ever happened to you before?
Yep, many times. So you have to practice a lot. Earlier days there were schools. It takes you 7 years to learn it.
Klompen schools don't exist anymore. So Martin learned everything from his father. The Dijkman family has been carving clogs in the town of Lutenberg for over 100 years. Martin took over the family business in 1997. Today, he lives behind his workshop, and he has clogs, well, everywhere.
You need 3-4 pairs in 1 year.
Martin shapes the shoe on a wooden bench his father built over 50 years ago. The long blade on top is called a palmus, and it's also about a half-century old. He starts by carving the outside of the clog, peeling off slice after slice. The two pieces have to be even.
Oh, this one is too high. This one is a little bit, this is more pointed. You have to start again. Yeah.
Martin can now begin digging out the inside of the shoe, starting with 2 holes. All these spoon drills he inherited are more than 80 years old. This one is called a lepelboor and works like an ice cream scoop. He uses this larger lepelboor to carve out the space between the 2 starter holes.
You can see it's very intensive.
Slowly, he works his way down to the toe box, removing rosettes of wood with each turn. He checks the length every step of the way with this old-school ruler. Martin says shoemakers used to measure clogs with their thumbs.
But Napoleon invented the centimeters. And the wooden shoe at that time, they have to go over 2 centimeters.
Today, he's working on a pair for a child.
The size must be 20 centimeters.
Next up, he carves out the toe box and the arch. This step, he says, takes the longest.
When you have a little stone in your shoes, you feel that. So yeah, you have to make it smooth.
Lastly, he forms the heel. It's about 3.5 centimeters tall. One final measurement, and he can begin smoothing the outside of the shoe.
So this is the nicest part.
Martin says 65% of the original wood piece is cut away. He burns the scraps to dry out his newly carved clogs. Each master clog maker etches in a design, sort of like a signature.
This is my grandfather's design. Yeah, I keep this alive.
It's hard to follow the exact history of wooden clogs because most rotted away or were used as firewood. The oldest wooden shoe found in the Netherlands dates back to the 13th century, and iterations were found across Europe. But their popularity in the Netherlands was the longest lasting. Wood was cheap and easy to find, and it protected workers' feet from sharp objects or from a stomping cow. Clogs were also water resistant, important for a shoe used to trudge across the Netherlands' wet and muddy landscape. By the 16th century, everyone from farmers and fishermen to factory workers were wearing them. But come the early 20th century, leather became more affordable for the working class, and machines started replacing local clog makers. Clogs had a small resurgence during World War II when leather was rationed. But soon after, klompen got a reputation as a shoe of the poor and fell out of fashion. And as clog making dies, so too does this art form. One of the last clog painters in the country lives about 70 miles away, in the picturesque fishing town of Hindelopen. Peter Botsma has been painting clogs for almost 4 decades.
I wasn't a person to study, so when I was 15, I knew already I have to work every day with my hands.
He starts with the base coat, either hand-painted or sprayed on.
It smells a little bit.
Between drying, applying a second coat of paint, and sanding, it takes Peter 2 days to complete just the base color.
It paints easier. That's also for the protection.
Then he brushes on local flowers, like daisies and tulips, and a bird.
And we call them the lucky bird, the Garuda.
He adds shadows in gray or brown and white for highlights.
I'm painting now the typical Hindeloper flowers. We call that Hielper schilderwerk. And it's from Scandinavia. It's very old. But we paint like it's in the nature. And in the nature, nothing is perfect. The flowers and the trees. So when you do it too big, too small, that's not a problem.
Peter learned everything he knows from his father, who ditched fishing for painting in the 1970s.
My father was not good for fishermen, but he was always sick on sea.
In 2016, he and his 2 sisters took over the family business. Nowadays, Peter still makes the designs his dad taught him.
And I paint every day the same flower, this one, and again, and again, and again. And my father said, no, that's not good. Again. Wow, again, for 2 years. It goes better, easier, like dancing.
Below his workstation, paint has built up for generations.
And when there is finished, or there is too much on the, then we do like this. Because my father painted on this table many, many years.
It takes Peter about 2 hours to paint 1 pair of clogs that he then sells for €50.
I cannot live for 25 euro in 1 hour for always, because I have 3 children, I have a wife, she needs a lot of money, my wife. So I have to think other things.
He says customers wouldn't buy his clogs if they were more expensive. To boost business, he sells small souvenir klompen for just a few euros. These blue ones are actually painted in China and shipped back to the Netherlands. He also paints custom orders like rocking horses and chairs. And he runs a gift shop, a skating museum, and even a restaurant.
So you have to try to do 5 things at once.
All around him are reminders of the painters that came before him, a living museum.
This is one of the painting palettes of my father.
Peter estimates fewer than 10 professional Hindelopen-style painters are left in the country.
The quality of the hand painting style, I think it's gone.
Just like Peter, Martin can't make a living just from his handmade wooden clogs. He says hardly anyone wears them anymore.
In the countryside where I live, in Luttenberg, people use it as to let the dog out in the evening, do something in the garden.
So he had to find a way to keep his family's heritage alive. In 2007, he started a new kind of mosaic, replications of famous masterpieces like Vermeer's Milkmaid from thousands of tiny clogs. His Night Watch by Rembrandt took 30,000 shoes and 3 years to complete.
My father said as a joke, maybe we can make the Night Watch from Rembrandt. So I said to him, yeah, it's too difficult. But a week later I was thinking, yeah, why not?
He started with a pixelated version of the piece and then hand-painted each mini shoe, 1 or 2 different colors, before gluing it into place.
Oil paint. You have to paint 2-3 times for the best results. So I had some help from volunteers who are living here in the area.
For tourists in the Netherlands, wooden clogs make great souvenirs, as much a symbol of the country as tulips, windmills, and cheese. Martin charges over $260 for a handmade pair. At that price point, he sells only 5 a year. Most of what's on sale in his shop are machine-made ones that go for around $30.
You can see this one is made by hand. And this is polished, sandpapered by machine. Yeah,
Which do you prefer?
of course.
Why?
Handmade it, huh? Yeah, you can see the art in it. The food shoemaker make 3 pairs in 1 day. And now we have factories. The quickest one can make 30 pairs in 1 hour.
To keep the business going, he also hosts tour groups with his wife Marijke and holds demonstrations of hand-carving clogs. With their many hustles, both Peter and Martin have managed to keep their crafts alive. But most clog artisans like them are close to retirement, so the future of their art forms is uncertain.
My son is not to take over, so I think I am the last wooden shoemaker from my family. That is what it is.
Peter could be looking at the same fate. None of his children plan to take on the family business.
I'm now 50 years, 52, and I think maybe we finished by 65, and then it's over. That's the way it goes.
The cassava root that gives the noodles their color and taste is also toxic when eaten raw. So the flour needs to be soaked for 2 days.
Kalau sudah mengendap, sedot lagi biar air yang warnanya coklat hilang.
The flour is then ground beneath a large stone for about an hour. It's so heavy, it needs to be pulled by an ox. Every few minutes, workers scrape it clean of any sticky flour, while Sally Joe continues to shovel the flour into the path of the stone. He also adds water to the mix to get the right consistency.
Saya juga madet pakai kaki itu, kurang air itu.
At 70 years old, he is a master, well accustomed to the physical demands of the job. He presses down with his feet to firm up the dough. He can feel when it's ready. It should be strong and not fall apart.
Kaki jangan kempel.
When it hardens, he cuts the dough into 8-inch cubes with a special knife called a sabit. He then places them on a 2-by-3-foot bamboo tray. As with most tools, workers make them by hand. The trays are heavy, and with a little help, Salijo puts them in a steam oven. After 90 minutes, they start to look for signs the dough is ready. While it's in the oven, the dough rises, but it's still not ready for shaping into noodles. It needs to go back to be ground one more time. The factory has 3 oxen. They are old, so while one works, the other 2 rest.
Mukito
oversees the whole process, making sure the dough doesn't fall apart.
Ini sudah bagus, ini jadinya ini dipres, misalnya ini tidak bodol itu.
He's been working here for 20 years.
Karena lihatnya nggak ada itu loh Bu, nggak ada pekerjaannya. Yang dekat di rumah saya hanya sini.
The factory opened here in the small town of Bantul in the 1970s, providing jobs to a community otherwise dominated by farming. Salijo has been at the factory for 10 years. He collects the ground dough into bags, each weighing 40 pounds. Finally, it's time to shape the noodles. This is the only step that isn't done by hand. Each lump of dough is enough to make 100 noodles, with each string around 2 feet long. This machine was brought in 20 years ago, but it often breaks, bringing production to a halt. Workers spread the noodles on bamboo trays and make sure they aren't tangled.
Jadi kita tipis, mateng, apa nane, niko.
The noodles cook in the oven again for about 1 hour. The doors don't seal properly, so workers use rags to plug any gaps and stop the steam from escaping. Then they're hung to cool for 2 hours. Each batch makes around 1 ton of noodles. In the morning, workers separate them by hand into portion sizes.
Supaya diurai, pisah-pisah, supaya kering.
Workers lay the noodles on large bamboo trays. The factory has 100 of them, and each one can be filled with up to 45 portions. The drying process takes about a day, but if it rains or it's too humid, there's a risk the whole batch could be ruined. So someone always has to be on watch.
Nah misalnya kalau nggak bisa kering sehari, misalnya 2 hari, tidak kering 3 hari, hujan terus, ya itu terus dilabuh gitulah.
That's because the noodles have no preservatives, so if they don't dry fast enough, they could go bad.
Yang penting menjaga kualitas, tidak banyak-banyak, jangan dibikin, yang penting kualitas gitu aja.
Judy Murianto inherited this factory from his uncle 23 years ago.
Anaknya tidak bisa meneruskan, saya meneruskan dari dengkul dulu.
Chinese settlers and traders likely brought noodles to Indonesia back in 2000 BC, and with them came many of their methods. Locals here say the first noodle factory in Bantul was opened in the 1940s by a Muslim preacher from Yemen. They started making them with cassava because his wife, a Chinese migrant, noticed it was abundant in the region. But the rapid rise of mass-produced instant noodles in the 1970s pushed traditional manufacturers out of the market. Today, Indonesia is one of the largest producers and consumers of instant noodles. Judy's factory is one of just 2 left in the country that make mie letek the traditional way. Once the noodles are dry, workers pack them into 10-pound bags. Each one will sell for around $5. That's half the price of Indomie, Indonesia's most popular brand of instant noodles. Buyers like Dahlia come directly to the factory to select bundles of noodles to sell at the market. The broken strands are reused in the dough or fed to the oxen.
Boten klothok pun kulon kemawon mangke ana baku teko dadi boten kula boten ider barang boten tahu.
The Bantul district has become well known for its noodles. They're even fit for a president. Barack Obama tried mie letek during a visit to the region in 2017.
Ya ada di warung-warung itu kan banyak-banyak turis-turis itu kan di warung-warung bakmi itu kan banyak tuh di dekatan itu ya itu.
Chef Haryanto is one of the oldest mie letek vendors in the area. His father started the business before Haryanto was born. And he still follows the same recipes today, cooking the noodles in chicken broth with vegetables.
Pengawet tanpa pewarna.
Jadi lebih menantang. Ya, itu makanya lebih sulit gitu.
Haryanto uses the same charcoal stove his father used. He says it gives a powerful aroma and better taste.
Lain orang kan lain bumbunya gitu. Nah, sama saya sederhana. Jadi nggak macam-macam lah. Kalau sederhana dari dulu memang mengandung ayah saya cuma ginian.
The noodles are chewy in texture and plain in taste. Almost all of Haryanto's customers are local. Despite costing half the price, Mie Letek can't compete with the big instant noodle manufacturers in Indonesia. And Judy isn't sure how long he'll be able to keep his business, one of just 2 remaining in the country, alive. His children have moved to larger cities and have little interest in taking on the business.
Kakiku bang baru pulang dari kakiku. Ngelakuin ya. Sangka asek ning lemah kali kalau ngombak gitu. Dibicarakan kayak lemah ngombak rasanya. Risiko ya, kalau orang Jawa risiko. Itu pun ya dalam benak saya berlomba, mana yang kualitasnya gitu.
Meanwhile, Mukiro is more upbeat about the future.
Dekat dan saya sudah suka kerja di sini. Misalnya masih kuat di sini ya ini karena masih ada yang muda-muda kan di sini ya juga muda-muda ya juga ada yang banyak lah kemungkinan yang bisa meneruskan sejarah di sini. Nah karena mie-nya tidak sama mie lain-lainnya itu.
Coconut husks are what give the salt its distinct taste. Nesta keeps thousands of them soaking in a saltwater pond near his workshop.
Lain na po sila kay inigahim mo na sa asin. Lain ang tiblada gyud lami gyud.
It can take 2 days to chop the 3,000 coconut husks needed to make 1 batch of salt. JJ Nogarada has been working here for about a year. Nesta and his wife adopted him when he was 4 years old after his mother died and his father became ill.
Love ko na yung trabaho ko. Gusto ko lang yung trabaho ko kahit ginto, kahit mahirap. Pero enjoy ko naman kasi yung mga...
The husks dry in the sun for a day. Next, Nesta sets them on fire, starting from the bottom. He learned salt making from his father and grandfather when he was 15 years old. But like many other young people, he left 3 years later to look for less laborious careers.
Di siya kung magkuha ng kay hago kayo. 2 kilometro sa ning kuha ang sa munot ug kahoy pag.
Today, his team of 4 does most of the work. The husks burn continuously for a whole week.
Kay binantayan ko na siya. Puli-puli yun na o magabi lain mo kuan ang adlaw lain pong gabi kay kapoy mga di man katugan siya. Dili katugan na siya kay ma-powder mo na siya katugan.
The pile of ashes left behind is called garsang. Workers break up any large pieces by hand. This is one of the most essential ingredients. Workers cover the rattan filter, called sak-sak, with a bed of fresh palm leaves to keep it from leaking. They pack the ashes in and spend an hour compressing them with a wooden stick. Then, about 1,300 gallons of seawater get pumped through the filter. What comes out on the other side is a salty brine called tasik. This step alone can take a day and a half.
Para sa kayo niya. Mo na ni ready to kuan ni. Kamay pahinay pa. Kuan pa. Mao na sa pwede ni mga tilawan niyo. Parat kayo.
Nesta patches the stove with a mixture of ashes and water before each use. The frequent high heat often damages it.
Kung anong tanan ay dako man trabaho god, dugay mo mahuman. Kay ugma man niya danong luto. Mao na tong makita man niya ini magapahan sila ani. Kita jud nang maglumbay ning 110 ka buok kani nga. Kon.
Then, he balances clay pots called gon between metal rods. It can take a whole hour to get it right. But Nesta says that's quick.
Sa una gani nga kawa pa ni kabilya. Puro bato ang pansak diha way kabilya. Pinilo na. Karon kay dugay man di mamuman usa ka adlaw.
One rock out of place could ruin months of work.
Importante kay og dili importante dili ma-pull ang ihang sulod ba. Kinahanglan gyud i-balance gyud niya og dili mga hagsak sa kuan sa kalayo. Kay mahagsak sa kalayo di wala nang kapuslanan. Hagsak tanan.
Nesta's family left the trade in 1983 after their workshop was destroyed in a typhoon. In 2010, his brother Chris convinced him to restart their business to save the tradition. Since then, other family members have also joined the trade. Like his cousin, Josephine Sumingit, one of the few potters in town who makes the clay pots. She learned how when she was 18 years old.
Ang among kanang kon sa una katong sudan og kanang tanaman kanang kaang kaang o kanang kalan mga tuan sa lungagan mo na ang kuan pag kuan na karon sa asen diyan mo na si ahong gi.
Back at the workshop, the team prepares the fire with mahogany wood and coconut fronds. Nesta has strict rules in place before any cooking begins. Everyone needs to remove jewellery or watches and refrain from eating oily foods. These are based on superstitions passed down for generations. Finally, it's time to start cooking. And it's all hands on deck. Jojo tends to the fire, while two others pour brine into the pots. They continue to fill them as the water evaporates. The process can take all day, ending when each pot is filled with salt crystals. These ladles are made from seashells since they are heat resistant and don't contain synthetic chemicals. Temperatures in the workshop can reach up to 104 degrees Fahrenheit.
Murag dugay-dugay na ko pero umawala sa timing usahay. Pag kanang labi na magsalibo nagkuan, dili mapuntuhan.
Bobong Poblete has been making salt here since the workshop opened. Today, he handles most of the cooking.
Mo ni karon sa kay di man may magwa ko diha ni agapon ko dire mo ga. Kuan, matol pa sa akong isuon pero ni kinahanglan na ako lagi. Hindi pwede ra man tago biyaan, pupong kay okay naman pupong.
After 8 hours, all the pots are finally full, but the salt won't be ready until they crack at the bottom. They sit to cool overnight. Workers take each pot out of the stove the next morning.
Okay, nagdikit man sila, tanggalon nila kay aron isa-isahon pag hinlo ang iyang kilid-kilid o pag kuha ning paglimpyo ning kilid po ba.
Workers crack open the bottom of the pot to reveal the salt. Coconut husks are the perfect cleaning tool to remove any dust. Most of the people who work with Nesta today had never made salt before, but now say they love the work.
Parang ano na rin, na masaya na rin kasi siyempre sila lang yung mga taong nakakaalam ng asin tapos parang senior nila yung mga nalalaman nila parang masaya din, ganun.
One batch makes 110 eggs. They can make up to 4 batches a month if the weather is good. One pot of asin tibuok can last a whole year. Nesta's sister, Veronica Manunga Salupan, is in charge of managing and marketing the workshop.
Isa sa bagay na ina-influensya ako sa paggawa ng asin tibuok is yung hard work. Focus ng trabaho at disiplina. Kasi yun ang pinamana ng tatay namin.
But selling it has been their biggest hurdle. A national law passed in 1995 requires all salt sold in the Philippines to be iodized.
Kailangan all Filipino will use iodized salt. Asin law, bawal tayo maglagay sa market nang dahil sa asin law.
The asin law was meant to combat malnutrition and prevent goiters, which are often caused by iodine deficiency. But the law devastated small-scale salt producers who couldn't afford the expensive machinery required to add iodine to their salt. National production dropped from 85% to 7% in 31 years. Nowadays, most of the salt in the Philippines is imported from Australia, China, and Mexico. Lawmakers proposed a bill in 2017 that would exempt natural sea salt producers from the ASIN law, but it's still pending approval.
Pero, hopefully, i-amenda yung asin law.
Artisanal salt producers have felt the impacts of similar laws across the world since the 1990s. Nangapura is one of the last farmers making balung salt in the seaside village of Kusamba in Bali, Indonesia. She spends her days carrying baskets full of seawater and pouring them on the volcanic sand to filter out the salt. For years, an iodine law similar to the one in the Philippines made it hard for farmers like her to sell salt in stores. Without regular buyers or frequent tourists, Nanga is often left with unsold stock. Salt farmers make so little that most have left the business for better paying jobs at nearby hotels and tourist spots. And even though Nanga has loved this work since she was 15, she doesn't want her children following the same path. Nowadays, she sells her salt to a cooperative that adds the iodine. Kusamba salt farmers received a geographical indication certificate from the Indonesian government in early 2022. It recognises that a product comes from a particular place and has a unique reputation because of it. But Indonesia imports around 2 million tonnes of cheaper salt every year, and the farmers face stiff competition. Farmers sell 1 kilogram of balung salt for about $2. That's more than 3 times the price of mass-produced salt sold in most grocery stores, making it a luxury for the majority of people. Nanga's main customers are tourists who come here to see the traditional methods and often leave with salt. Like Nanga, Nesta also depends on a foreign customer base. Tourists are his main buyers. He also sells some of it online to other countries.
Ay sige magkahali ni ma'am kay pero dili pag sugod na mo wa may nabiya nga na reject nga asin huro to kahalin ko tanan.
Restaurants are also required to use iodized salt, but some have been taking a chance and adding asin tibuok to their menu. Chef Jordi Navarra has been buying it from Nesta since 2018. His award-winning restaurant, Toyo Eatery, in the country's capital, Manila, serves contemporary Filipino cuisine.
We prioritize using local ingredients and serving up our own versions of Filipino dishes.
The salt is the perfect finishing touch to the best-selling dessert, leche flan ice cream. The restaurant's pastry chef, Bettina Taniedo, showed us how to make it.
Firstly, we start with melting sugar. We use raw turbinado sugar from Negros in a pan until it reaches a hard crack stage.
They pour a mixture of egg yolk, sugar and milk on top and steam it for 1 hour. It's chilled and then churned into ice cream.
I don't think the ice cream could be complete without the asin tibuok. I just think they're the perfect pair.
I've had the chance to visit the Cymbal-maker in Bohol together with Chef Jordi, and you get a better appreciation of what these people are doing, which is not just basically making salt, but preserving heritage, preserving culture.
Nesta and Veronica say it's been difficult finding the next generation of asin tibuok producers. Even their children are hesitant to take over the business.
Sana one day maisip ng anak ko na kailangan bigyan ko ito ng halaga. Kasi galing pa sa ninuno namin hanggang sa tatay namin.
Weather here has become more unpredictable in recent years. Nesta and Veronica have to watch out for heavy rains and typhoons, which have been hitting the island even during the dry season. In 2021, Super Typhoon Odette ravaged the Philippines, with Bohol being one of the hardest hit areas. The storm destroyed their workshop and they couldn't complete orders for months.
Katong naguba nga asina na mo dito nga tumbaging Odette, na was out man tanang dito pagabas.
Ay, ang salamat sa Panginoon. Maraming mga customer na nakabili sa atin, nagpapadala ng 500, napadala ng 1,000 para sa itulong daw sa paggawa ulit.
They spent 3 months rebuilding it, and in March 2022, they finally reopened. Despite the challenges, Nesta and Veronica are confident in the team they have now.
Blessed naman kami, may dalawa kami mga young one, si JJ at saka si Kim. Tingnan, no, sila lang, wala ako dito, si Nong Isor, wala, sila lang. Pero alam nyo, ginawa nila yung anong dapat nilang gawin.
Other salt makers in Bohol have also started up again. Nesta and Veronica know how difficult the work is, but they believe the legacy of asin tibuok is worth it. And they're proud to be carrying on the tradition in their ancestors' honor.
Sa ngayon, ang saya, ang taba ng puso ko. Dahil, naging emotional ako basta ganitong question po. Kasi, naging emotional ko kasi alam ko na yung tatay namin, yung lolo namin is happy sila ngayon. Kasi, yun ang legacy na iniwan nila sa amin na akala namin walang magawa.
Na daghang mga moara diri nga congratulations nga maayong pagkatrabaho niya ang among mga hasta mga guest ko na mga mo diri nga maayo ni kay wani undanga pagtrabaho ning asinan. Dako lugar po nga naka kuan may aning gitagaan mig kuan mga.
Behind these doors, craftsmen forge Zildjian's secret alloy from copper, tin and silver. But not even the man who shapes the symbols knows the recipe.
I have no idea how they do it. I just know it's the best metal in the world for cymbal making. So
1,000 metal castings are made every day. And Alan Levitt sorts and weighs each of them. Even at this early stage, he can hear any issues with the metal.
Well, but listen for the ringtone. Yeah, you can hear it yourself when I hear it. They possess quite the ringtone.
The ones that pass inspection go into the oven to be reheated. This loader can feed up to 240 castings every hour.
We used to have those long rakes that you put the pies into the oven. That's really a strain on their back.
After 30 minutes, the metal is about 900 degrees Fahrenheit and soft enough to be rolled. Once they've cooled, the castings go back into the oven for 30 to 40 minutes. This process of heating and rolling is repeated multiple times until the castings are as thin as a credit card. And it hasn't changed much since at least the 19th century. Next, the cymbals head to the cupping machine, which will shape the bell. The bigger the bell, the more the instrument will project, and the longer it will ring. Joe Pillai has worked in almost every step of production in his 29 years here.
I love working with my hands, and I love music. It's kind of like my way of giving back, you know.
He uses a blanking press to cut the cymbals to the correct size.
All of the extra metal goes into our scrap printer, and it all gets recycled.
Then, it's time for hammering. The first step that really begins to change the sound.
It more or less controls the shape, and it regulates the sound waves going through.
The impact hammer creates dents at precise points and can apply different pressure throughout. The rotary hammer creates a circular pattern with consistent pressure. Both machines affect the pitch and tone. The cymbal gets its signature umbrella shape in the forming press. The deeper the curve, the higher the pitch. Then it's time for Joe's favourite moment: lathing.
Lathing's where the magic really happens, I think. Different type of lathing, different type of sound.
The shaper scrapes off layers of metal as the cymbal spins. It also cuts small tonal grooves in a circular pattern. Deeper and sharper grooves create more sustain, affecting how long the cymbal will ring out. Joe tapers the cymbal down, making the weight even. He has to be careful not to apply too much pressure, or he risks overworking the cymbal and making it too thin.
You're always troubleshooting. I think you're just trying to figure out how to make the cymbal perfect, you know. That's what I love about it.
Finally, he removes any imperfections with a grinder. Then, this machine smooths out the edges. But they aren't ready just yet. Each cymbal needs to be tested. Joe works closely with Guy Licata, the manager of innovation, to test 200 in half an hour.
At this stage, we're just looking really for major visual and sound defects. You know instantly if it's a good cymbal or a bad cymbal. It's when they're questionable that you really dig into it and debate it. Well, this one was overworked. You can see the rippling.
Yeah. Within acceptable ranges between here and here. So this is the standard. Those are almost identical. So this is considered conforming. This would pass.
Each cymbal is then cleaned by hand. finally coated with a polyurethane solution.
Mostly to protect against fingerprinting.
Zildjian has sold as many as 1 million cymbals worldwide in a year. They can cost between $90 and $4,000 each. But even with its global success, Zildjian still operates as a family-owned business.
Go inside.
This room holds some of the earliest Zildjian cymbals made in America.
We call this the family vault. Some of these fingerprints belong to my grandfather or my father and some of the cymbal testers.
Craigie is the 14th generation Zildjian to run the company. She was the first woman to become CEO in 1999. Today, she works as president.
I never thought I would end up in the family business. It was really just for the male members. These are heavy.
A select few cymbals were gifted to some of the world's most famous drummers.
So we gave one of these to Ringo, and we had to do something so it could adapt to his hardware. But this is very old looking.
The family's story begins way back in 1618 in the Ottoman Empire, in what is now Istanbul. The company's founder, Avedis I, was an Armenian smith who worked for the Sultan, making cymbals for the military band. While trying to make gold, he discovered a bronze alloy that made the instrument stronger but thinner, with a clearer sound. He founded the company in 1623, and it thrived for centuries. The 12th generation owner, Avedis III, moved to America in the early 1900s. He was Craigie's grandfather.
If he had stayed in Turkey, that was not a good place to be for an Armenian.
The factory officially relocated to Quincy, Massachusetts, just a month before the Great Depression hit in 1929. But as the economic crisis took hold, so did a new style of American music.
It was the beginning of the jazz era, which was here.
Zildjian created cymbals for jazz legends like Gene Krupa, Chick Webb, and Joe Jones. Avedis III worked directly with them to develop new cymbals like the ride, the hi-hat, and the crash. Those gave drummers more range and freedom, and were crucial for the evolution of music.
It became the basis for cymbals as we know them today.
This collaborative tradition continued with Craigie's father in the following decades.
The ideas really just kind of flourished as my dad was there, testing cymbals in front of them, all the top drummers of the day, and we'd gain their input. Louis, Elvin, and Roy. Here's my dad. This was my dad's drum kit. I've left this as it was when he was here, when this was his office.
In the 1940s, the company provided cymbals for American and British troops during World War II. But it was the Beatles' first US performance that made Zildjian a household name. In February 1964, Ringo Starr used the company's cymbals during the band's appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show.
The Beatles, bring 'em on!
The Beatles changed everything. All of a sudden, we were back ordered because everyone wanted to start a band, a garage band.
From there, musicians from all genres were lining up to get one too.
Everything from the band and orchestra world, to marching, to jazz, to rock, to metal, to country, to everything in between.
By the mid-1980s, the company was the world's leading maker of cymbals with 40% of the market share. Today, it's made cymbals for drummers like Questlove, Travis Barker, and Anderson .Paak.
This is my dad here. Yeah. My father always said we need to follow the music. So wherever the music leads us, That's how we track it, is through these musicians.
To this day, the company works closely with musicians to develop custom models tailored to their styles.
Artists are looking to express themselves. They're looking for, sometimes it's a sound, again, sometimes it's a tactile feel or response, sometimes it's an emotion.
It's why drummers like Omar Hakim only use cymbals made by Zildjian.
If I have identified a need for some instruments that I don't have in my arsenal at that moment, 11 times out of 10, they've got the solution. This is one of my favorite cymbals. It's called the K-Custom Hybrid Trash Smash.
He got his first set of Zildjians when he was just 8 and has exclusively used the company's cymbals for nearly 5 decades. Over the years, Omar has worked with artists like David Bowie, Madonna, Michael Jackson, and Miles Davis.
It's important to have a set of cymbals that resonates with the music that you're trying to create, speaks to you as a musician. When you blend the metal and the skins and the wood, and you create this tonal palette to kind of cover a full spectrum of sound.
Omar says, although other cymbal companies have popped up, Zildjian still sets the standard.
Even the old ones are the bar. And that's heavy when the entire industry is using your product as the example of what needs to be in the marketplace.
The next generation of Zildjians is already working to continue the family legacy.
Gen 15, they're all board members. Each generation is charged with revitalizing the business and adding something to it.
Craigie says that as long as music lives on, so will Zildjian.
There will always be music. I mean, music is part of our soul, right?
Isabelle Rocher, a relative of Henri Rocher, and Margaret Zayer are the company's only 2 employees. They make new pastel sticks a lot like the old ones, starting with pigment and a binder, based on a secret formula that took Rocher and his son decades to develop.
People like Whistler, Redon, Degas, Sisley, who all had issues with the medium. They were having problems with the powder sticking to the paper. They were having mold on their works. So Henri Rocher brought all of his scientific skills to try and remedy and bring them the product that they were looking for.
So the base of this new color is cerulean blue, which is a very classic pigment.
This new color, Caribbean blue, will join more than 1,900 others the Maison offers. It's the biggest selection in the company's history, maybe even the biggest selection of pastels ever. So adding new colors to the mix takes a discerning eye and skilled hands. That's where Margaret comes in. She's the creative force behind the business.
If the sun's out and we don't feel like working, we don't work. Or if the sun's out and it inspires us to make a beautiful color, we do that.
After the initial color is set, Isabel and Margaret divide it into 9 gradations, from dark to light, so artists can find the exact shade they need.
So I'm essentially aiming to go between those two. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. This will be number 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Margaret, I started with 1.5 spoons of the dark. I think I'm going to be making masses already.
Throughout its centuries-long history, the Maison was renowned for its unmatched range of colors. This is especially important for pastel artists, who can't just mix 2 pastels together to make a new color before putting it to paper.
You can't blend pastel on a palette like a painter might, but if you really want to make a line of a color, you need to have a stick of that color.
That blending needs to happen at the very beginning of a pastel's life instead.
I'm actually not far from where I want to be, which is really magical. I'm going to mix it, I really mix it in before I compare. So I'm actually right now a bit darker than I want to be, so I'm gonna add a bit of white.
If the paste is too stiff, you can't integrate the white and the color very easily, but by bringing it to a sort of cake batter consistency, they merge quite well.
When they're satisfied with the color, Isabel scoops the mixture onto a terracotta roof tile to dry.
We use the tiles because that's how it was done in the past, but the advantage of the tiles is they're porous.
The tiles absorb a bunch of the moisture, creating less work for Margaret when she will put the mixture through their antique press. After the paste has adequately dried, Margaret wraps it in a cloth and uses an antique press to gradually squeeze the moisture from the paste.
This is a tool that was there when Isabel took over the maison. I would imagine it's been used for quite a long time.
Yeah, essentially a lot of what we're surrounded with are tools and drawers that date back 150 years. And it's as well, it gives us this sense of âme in French, I'm not sure how you say that in English, of spirit, a soul.
Margaret joined Isabel at the Maison in 2010 after a visit to the shop. She sent a cold email inquiring about a summer job and ended up finding her calling.
I would have been happy just cleaning the shop, so I didn't expect an invitation to come to the house and make the pastels with her.
The way I see it is I allowed the business to survive, and today I'm giving Margaret a sort of structure within which she can really make the craft live.
And by the end of this, we'll probably end up with something more consistent with modeling clay cookie dough. This is one of those points in the process, though, where you might want to just sort of muscle it, but you actually have to be quite attentive. There's certain colors that lose water quite quickly that you can easily overpress. And it's always more complicated adding water back. Oh, that's better. Is it? Okay, I'm coming over with the paste.
Hand rolling each pastel allows them to add more pigment to the mix than if they used a machine.
We tolerate certain consistencies that machines can't tolerate. We end up with colors that are either more vibrant or deeper or more concentrated. To me, it's always been the phase of the making that I prefer. It's sort of the moment when you're actually forming them, so you're starting to see it happening and becoming a pastel. When you don't know how to roll them, you can end up with pancakes. The first pastels I made just didn't look like anything. They were all weird shapes and they were flat, they had holes in them.
The cutting with the large blade, I believe that was also the invention of Henri Gaucher to the traditional process, because I think in the past they used to cut the sticks once they were dry, which took forever. So it's cutting the ends in one fell swoop.
When Isabel took over the company for her aging aunts in 2000, she held on to many of the tools and techniques that Rocher developed in his day.
and then we let them air dry, usually for about 3 weeks. Depends on the season, depends on the colors.
But there was also plenty about the languishing business that needed to change. When she took over, the Maison had next to no inventory and hardly any customers to sell it to.
My great-aunts were in their 80s when I took over, which means that for the last 20 years they hadn't made much. They were very secretive, so they hadn't tried to generate new customers. So essentially their customer base, as the artists had grown older and died, they hadn't been replaced.
So she spent her first 2 years regenerating supply.
I managed to reconstitute about 250 or 300 colors.
Before focusing on demand. The Maison serves what's known as a niche market. Imagine the market as a pie. While a mass market company like Crayola tries to carve the biggest slice by appealing to as many people as possible, businesses serving niche markets cut smaller, specialty slices that appeal to a specific type of customer. A huge reason for Rocher's success was how he collaborated with artists to create the colors they needed. And Isabelle was determined to do the same.
The most difficult thing for me was that I had no art background at all. I had no artistic background either. I didn't draw, I didn't paint. So when I was talking to the artists, I felt I was talking a different language.
One of these artists is Claude Barré-Allard.
I've known her since the day I took over. I think that the first color I made was a bleu indigo, an indigo blue, that she'd been waiting for 2 years.
Did she tell you that she was creating colors for me?
Yeah.
Yes, I did. That makes me very proud, for sure. That means that they like what I can do with their colors, for sure. They serve me, I serve them. It's an exchange, as in life.
Claude picked up pastels later in her career, after spending most of it working with oil paints.
I bought the Pastel Rocher very slowly in the beginning, and I discovered that I sold much more with the Pastel Rocher because the work became much better, because the quality of pigments was wonderful.
Historically, pastels have taken a back seat to more popular mediums like oil paints.
You have waves of it being used extensively, and then it goes back into being a secondary medium that people only use, to do basic drawings and etc. We are aware that, it comes and goes, and at the moment we feel that a few artists are really picking up the technique and doing really serious things with it, not just preparatory drawings. I walked into this thinking there are just maybe a handful or maybe 10 artists in France that really need the pastels. If I can multiply that by the number of countries around the world, I should be able to make a living out of it.
Isabelle inherited an archive of century-old pigment, some of which is still usable. Sometimes, Margaret can even reach into the company's past to make new pastel colors.
Oh, that's beauty. It's a really beautiful ochre, actually. Actually, I'm processing this in real time. That I really like this pigment. This is a genuine discovery. Well, I kind of want to see what kind of a pastel this makes. I imagine because it's an ochre, it will make an agreeable texture. I want to compare this to ochres that we already have in the range to see if I'd actually do you mind if I go get a piece of paper and a bit of white?
Sure.
While much of the process remains the same as when Rocher ran things, what Isabelle and Margaret really hold on to is how he thought about the business.
What really makes, our pastels what they are is his formulas and how they marry to the craftsmanship of the artisan that he met.
Avec les pastels Rocher, c'est une ascension, quoi. On progresse dans la pose de la couleur et ça c'est essentiel parce que, enfin, dans mon travail c'est essentiel.
I know that Margaret has in her head several other ranges that she wants to bring in, and on paper she already knows that one day we will go above 2,000. But essentially, as long as we keep having people coming to the shop asking for colors they don't have, we're going to be bringing in new things.
Frank's family has been making cheese in the town of Zoeterwoude for over 150 years. Every day, he starts by warming over 600 gallons of milk, pumped in from the milking barn.
Milk floating in now is like 37 degrees, just the body temperature of a cow.
For every batch of cheese, he adds rennet, enzymes that make the proteins in the milk clump together into solid curds, leaving behind the liquid whey.
Rennet is like a pair of scissors cutting through the milk.
After 30 minutes, a giant curd has formed.
It should break open like that. That's good.
This machine starts cutting it into pieces.
And we cut it real small in order to have very little moisture in the cheese, in order to make a cheese which can age for years.
Frank's parents taught him how to make cheese when he was 22 years old.
My brother and I are the 7th generation kaptein producing cheese and milking cows. And well, there will be at least 7 generations of cows walking on this farm as well.
He took over the family business with his brother in January of 2022.
I think 50% of the Dutch people has a great-grandfather who's been a farmer. Farmers shaped the landscape in the Netherlands.
In the 13th century, nearly a fifth of what is now the Netherlands was underwater. Over the centuries, the Dutch built dikes to hold back the sea. Farmers drained large portions of the reclaimed land to plant crops. But one of the only things that would grow on the wet soil was grass. So raising cattle for meat, milk, and cheese became big business. The dairy industry eventually became a symbol of the Netherlands, as much as tulips and windmills. Milk and cows graced Dutch masterpieces by Vermeer and Van Gogh. By the 20th century, the Netherlands was producing so much cheese, it was a valuable export. Today, almost all Dutch dairy farms sell their milk to big factories that pasteurize it and use machines to make cheese on a large scale. But Frank only works with raw milk. Just 4% of Dutch dairy farms make Gouda in-house like he does.
We still produce it on the way like my great-grandfather did. And I don't know if it's extra good, but I like it.
And what machines do at factories, he still prefers doing by hand, like checking the consistency of the curds himself.
No, it's just warm way. It's like almost 30 degrees. And the curd is real soft now. And now the curd over here is just like this deep under the whey, and over there there's no curd anymore. But I'm just checking if the curd is a bit equally divided, equally spread.
He can start draining out some of that liquid whey, but nothing goes to waste. He skims the fat to make butter and feeds the whey to his pigs.
The pigs are already happy with just whey. And I like butter on my sandwich in the morning.
He slices the leftover curd into sections large enough for a wheel of cheese. He gauges the right amount by feel. Meanwhile, Frank's employee Savannah prepares the old buckets, most of which were Frank's grandfather's.
There are only a handful of farmers in the Netherlands who still use wooden buckets.
Frank drifts a cloth below the surface and piles the curds on top. The cloth will help the last bit of whey drain out. They repeat the process for 12 wheels of cheese.
There's a lot of weigh in, so I think about 25-30 kilograms, something like that. And it's cozy.
These presses squeeze out the remaining liquid. All this cheese comes from the milk of Frank's 200 female cows. The Netherlands has nearly 1.6 million of them, and they produce lots of nitrogen because of what they eat: fertilizer-grown grass in the summer and imported grain and soy year-round. Their pee is full of nitrogen too, and when it mixes with their poop, it creates a gas called ammonia. The plumes of ammonia drop down onto nature reserves and acidify the soil. Some nitrogen-loving plants like grass take over, while other native plants can't absorb proper nutrients. From there, it's a domino effect. Many native plants grow weak or die out. Snails can't get enough nutrients to build their shells. The birds that eat the snails can't develop eggs, or their chicks are born with frail bones. Inside one of the Netherlands' largest national parks, rangers like Annemieke Visser-Winterink say oak and pine trees are dying out.
They're all sick. There's not one that I would say, oh, you know, that's very, very fit or very a healthy tree. You can say that the trees are starving. It's not getting all the nutrients that it needs to be a very healthy, full-grown oak tree that it can be.
Environmentalists say 14 habitats in the country are on the brink of collapse.
The dairy sector is one of the drivers of biodiversity loss in the Netherlands.
Back in 1992, what is now the European Union adopted a law known as the Habitats Directive, requiring countries to designate nature areas for conservation. In order to comply, the Netherlands introduced policies to cut nitrogen on these protected lands. Back then, Dutch farms had one of the highest ammonia emission rates in Europe. By 2019, the industry had cut its emissions by almost 2/3. Covered manure storage, like below this slatted floor, has helped. If it stays sealed underground for enough time, the ammonia won't evaporate as much.
Everywhere we are standing, there's 2 meters deep basement full of manure and pee.
But these efforts alone weren't enough. The farms releasing the most ammonia sat near those protected nature reserves. The nation's highest court said the Netherlands needed to do more. The government scrambled to comply. Some lawmakers suggested cutting the number of animals in the country in half. Farmers were outraged. They protested for weeks, dumping manure on streets and blocking roads with tractors.
Het is voor ons bestaansrecht. Dus ja, ik hoop dat voor te zetten, maar dan moeten de regels wel mee gaan werken, anders zal dat niet mogelijk zijn.
By early 2023, the government lowered the goal to a 50% cut. But by then, a pro-farmer political party named the Farmer Citizen Movement had swept provincial elections. Rick Lueders is a party leader in this area.
We have a nitrogen law which is rigid and is fully focused on dairy farming, and we want that this law is gone.
Soon after, the government announced a $1.6 billion plan to buy out and close up to 3,000 high-emitting farms near nature reserves. A farmer can voluntarily take the buyout and possibly get more than their farm is worth. But for Frank, selling his 7-generation farm isn't an option. He says his cows are like family.
This is Gina. She's the highest ranking, and she's the leader of the herd. She just bosses other cows away with her head, mainly. So when she wants to drink and there's another cow, boink, move aside. I'm Gina, here I am, and I want to drink.
He even got married on this farm, surrounded by his cows. And it's tradition in his family to name cows after relatives.
And I named the cow after my daughter as well.
Frank and his brother milk the cows twice a day.
First we clean the teeth, starting at left front, right rear, and left rear. And then we connect the milking claw. There's a little bit of vacuum underneath, so it sucks the milk away.
Frank gets about 8 gallons of milk a day from each cow. What he can milk in 15 minutes would have taken his grandfather an entire day. New technology helped dairy and livestock farms consolidate, beginning in the mid-20th century.
Little farmers, cheese makers, they quit. And the bigger ones, they grow bigger.
To this day, between 70 and 80% of the country's dairy is sent abroad, mainly to other European countries.
That's all in the region of between, let's say, London, Paris and Berlin, within an area of 800 kilometers. In the USA, you would call that a local product.
The Netherlands is also the EU's largest exporter of meat. It trades about $9 billion worth of pork, beef, and poultry internationally every year. And it does it all on land not much bigger than the US state of Maryland. For much of the world, the Netherlands became a roadmap for how to farm efficiently at scale. But environmentalists like Natasha Orlemans from the World Wildlife Fund see it differently.
I see the Netherlands as an example of where everything went wrong. Exporting the meat and dairy and having a huge amount of manure here in the Netherlands, causing all these environmental and societal problems.
The farmers we spoke to said saving the environment should go hand in hand with preserving their centuries-old traditions. Traditions like flipping the cheese.
In the first 24 hours of the cheese, we turn it like 6 times.
Flipping ensures both sides of the wheel will be round, like the curve of the bucket.
See it already turning yellow. So it's a good sign.
Then he moves the cheese wheels into a salty brine.
The salt bath is mainly for making a crust around the cheese. A little bit of salt will get deeper into the cheese for a little bit of taste.
Frank ages his specialty Gouda for up to 10 years at a consistent 59 degrees Fahrenheit.
This is one is from 2013, so 10 years old now. And still looking shiny, still looking young.
Here he stores hundreds of wheels, over $100,000 worth of cheese.
Every day we turn them, put an extra layer of coating on top of it.
That liquid plastic coating seals in the moisture.
And of course to keep mold away. You hear it when I lift it, it gets stuck on the shell. So that's why you flip it as well.
As it ages, friendly bacteria build up amino acids, these crystals.
It's where the flavor of the cheese comes from.
Frank can tell it's aging well from the sound.
It's nice flat here. You hear it?
Frank is one of over 45,000 people working in the Dutch dairy industry.
If you just take out half of the farmers and half of the jobs and half of the income, where do these people going to work? They go to the cities probably, and the whole villages at the countryside will become ghost cities, I think.
Within 10 or 15 years, I'm worried, who's going to produce our food? And where is it coming from?
Many farmers now face a tough decision. Take the buyout, decrease their herds, move their farms, or make pricey upgrades to try to cut nitrogen emissions. But not everyone can afford costly innovations. Many farmers are working on narrow margins or are already in debt.
Farmers don't get a loan from the bank because they say, oh, we don't know if you can still farm after this due to these regulations.
Plus, farmers don't even know yet if innovations could actually save their farm from closure. Researchers at Wageningen University are hoping they can.
This is not a commercial dairy farm. It's a research center.
That's Kees de Koning. He runs the university's dairy campus. His team is testing different iterations of the slatted floor Frank has.
We can run trials where we separate the urine and the solids.
They're also studying the effect of robotic scrapers and poop vacuums. By quickly moving waste into closed storage, vacuums reduce methane and ammonia loss. But Keys estimates one like this could cost over $20,000, and a farm of 120 cows would need 2. Keys says changing cows' diets is a cheaper option.
So, can we feed cows in such a way that we have less ammonia emission or less nitrogen losses?
His team feeds the cows different combinations of food. Then they use these troughs to test how much the animals eat and their emissions.
The electronic ID system is identified, so we know exactly which cow is in the box.
So if innovations can't help, farmers still have the option of the buyout. As of November 2023, nearly 1,000 livestock farms had registered for it. Almost a quarter were dairy farms. But the government won't pay them out for a while.
It will take at least another 6 months to a year before that is finalized.
That same month, a new right-wing party, PVV, won the most seats in the country's parliamentary elections. Geert Wilders, the party's leader, spoke at farmer protests earlier in the year.
They are killing our farmers for some idiotic leftist liberal so-called nitrogen problem in the Netherlands.
The party has signaled it wants to stop government spending on initiatives to curb nitrogen, including the fund for the buyout plan. Rick hopes the PVV will form a coalition with other pro-farmer parties.
We can make new laws. It's quite simple.
But a coalition could take months. The World Wildlife Fund says this delay will only lead to further deterioration of nature. Meanwhile, farmers are in limbo.
It's the limbo that paralyzes the agricultural sector. And that limbo is very dangerous for nature as well, because it's still suffering. It's horrible, and I can feel for them.
This problem isn't unique to the Netherlands. Dairy farmers in Ireland might have to decrease the size of their herds because of unsafe nitrogen levels in rivers, which are causing algae blooms. New Zealand has some of the most polluted waterways in the world. Dairy farming is one of the biggest sources of these dangerous nitrate levels in drinking water. And in the U.S. state of California, agriculture has contributed to hazardous air pollution. All of these countries will have to contend with the same questions the Netherlands faces today. How do we feed ourselves, preserve tradition, keep economies running, and protect our planet?
I don't see myself as being opposing to farmers. I'm opposed to the system the way it is now. It's ecologically a disaster, and it's also not bringing farmers a proper income. So basically it's a system that's being broken, and that system needs to be fixed.
Frank seems open to a fix too.
If it helps nature or climate, bring it on.
Maybe then his family can continue making cheese for another 7 generations.
I hope that dairy farmers have a future in the Netherlands. I think we're really connected to the landscape. I hope farms won't grow too big, so it can be run on a family scale. I think that's a beautiful way of living.
My goal is to make $1 million Martin. Haven't done it yet.
Chris Martin IV is the 6th generation of his family to run the company. His namesake, Christian Frederick Martin, founded the company in 1833.
I work at a company that makes the best of its kind. I work at a company that makes the real thing. We're not making a commodity. We're not making a copy of a Martin guitar. We're still making the original Martin guitar.
Martin employs about 1,100 people across its 2 factories in Nazareth, Pennsylvania and Navajo, Mexico. The craftspeople in Nazareth work on the high-end models and custom designs. It all starts with selecting the right wood. Guitars and other instruments use what are called tone woods. These have special properties that vibrate and transmit the ideal sound for musical instruments. Typically, spruce is used for the tops and bottoms, rosewood for the sides, and maple or mahogany for the neck. But Martin uses a wide variety of woods for its instruments. These tone woods are responsible for the clear, bell-like tone that musicians like Craig Thatcher say is a key difference in Martin's acoustic guitars.
Every guitar has their own voice, particularly acoustic guitars. And there is a Martin tone, a Martin voice that you can distinguish when they're hearing it on the radio, hearing on records, hearing it being played on movie soundtracks. The Martin guitar really stands out, that tone. It's a full and rich, vibrant sound with deep and full basses, a really great mid-range, nice high end that cuts through.
The tops and bottoms are not one piece, but actually a panel that has been carefully sliced in half and opened like a book, then glued together at the edges. This book matching helps create a perfectly symmetrical pattern. These pieces are then checked for quality in a process known as candling.
Candling is a light that shines through the wood, and back in the old days they used to use a regular candle and do it like that, but now they upgraded it, thank God.
Dee has been with Martin for 21 years, and she has spent the last 9 working in the candling department looking for any imperfections before they progress any further down the assembly line.
What we do is we grade the wood, it goes from 2 to 8, and then what we do is we candle to look for any sap pockets or pitch pockets or knots or anything like that.
Like Dee, many of the workers in Martin's factory have been with the company for a long time. Rodney Tashner, who currently runs the laser cutter, has been working the line for 33 years.
We are running a 400-watt laser machine here, cut out all the tops, sides, backs, most of all, pretty much all flat stock that's run on here.
The next step is the most crucial to Martin's signature sound, the bracing. Bracing refers to a hidden pattern of wood glued under the top of the guitar for structural support. All acoustic guitars require bracing, but designing effective bracing is complicated. Because the guitar's top is the most important factor of its sound, it's crucial to not burden it with too much wood.
One of the things when you're looking at an acoustic guitar, you want it to be structurally sound, but you also want it to sound good. Because if we brace this too heavy, the top's not going to vibrate freely, and if we don't brace the top strong enough, it could just implode on itself.
In the 1840s, Christian Frederick Martin invented this X pattern, which provides plenty of structural integrity without sacrificing tone. The design was so successful that almost all steel string acoustic guitars made today use the pattern.
And what's that old saying? If imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, we are very flattered because we are very imitated.
A craftsperson will glue the pieces onto the surface with fish glue and use this machine to hold everything in place while it dries. These thin pieces of wood are positioned and then carved into the right shape based on each guitar model.
After I take the guitar, I'll shape down all the braces to a certain size and sand them down and round them out. Every model has its own particular needs. They're all very different, and we do have to memorize quite a bit of them. There's about 50 different patterns that I have to memorize. I started back in September, and it took me about 5 months before I could really start doing these myself. There is a lot of training that goes into it.
The sides of the guitar are separate pieces of rosewood, which are steam pressed into this curved shape and glued together to form the rim. A perforated ribbon of Spanish cedar is attached around the edges for additional support using clothespins. The ribbon adds surface area that will assist with attaching the top and bottom.
As much as we do on the outside, we try to clean up all the glue inside and make sure all of the ribbons where it should be, and braces are fit nice and snug in their pockets.
Aluminium casting is used to attach the top and bottom to the rim and hold everything together while it dries. Next, either this machine or a craftsperson cuts a channel around the edge of the guitar, a process called freezing, to make space for the binding strip. The body is sanded and sprayed with fillers, sealers, toners, and stains to protect the wood. And it's left to hang dry in a curing room at a high temperature until the finishing has hardened. Though many steps of the process are still done by hand, Martin has started to incorporate robotics into its assembly line, some of which were built and designed in-house in its machining department. This giant robotic arm, for example, suctions onto the wood and is programmed to buff each body at very specific pressures. The necks of the guitars go through their own parallel production process. First, they're cut separately into identical base pieces. Then, they're sanded down into shape by hand. Each model requires a different neck shape, so craftspeople use these metal gauges to keep all the shapes consistent. Then the fingerboard, frets and nut are added at stations down the line. But before a guitar can be glued together, a technician will perform a pre-fit to ensure everything aligns perfectly. Steve Miller has worked for Martin for 26 years, and for him, it's a family tradition.
Yeah, we have a lot of family. I could sit here and go, my uncle, my aunts, my sister works here. I had a grandfather that worked here. Yeah, we go back, way back, since 1833, so.
Once assembled, the guitar goes into this machine called a pleg, which simulates the tension of the strings and makes computerized adjustments to the frets to ensure the guitar is perfectly intonated and playable. But the final and most crucial step is to string up the guitar and play it. Only a human being, like Matt Hotchkiss, is suitable for this task.
This is my first job in the factory, yes. I was lucky. I've been a musician for about 8-9 years now. I went to school for music, came out, and then I started working here, and just inspecting guitars has been a dream, so it's been great. My grandfather had an old 76 D35 that I've been playing since I was very young, and it was important to me to work here when I graduated college, just so it lived on through my family and through me.
Matthew will make sure everything looks perfect before stringing the guitar, tuning it, and gluing on the pick guard.
It does take a steady hand to make sure you get it right, but we do use a little bit of a marking to make sure. We also look for any type of defects within the guitar, like any dents or anything that has happened throughout the process.
And last but not least, he will test it out. And place it in the case for the customer. Martin's guitars have evolved significantly over the 200 years of the company's existence. Just take a look and listen to this model from 1834, the oldest guitar in its collection.
You can see it's very different from what we build now. There's a heavy violin influence. It has maple back and sides, that figure-8 body shape.
The company invented the iconic extra-large dreadnought-style guitar, named after a World War I battleship. Martin saw a surge in demand for its guitars during the COVID-19 pandemic, with many people stuck at home looking for something to do. It's seen about 20 to 30% growth per year over the last 2 years.
So COVID created a guitar boom. It wasn't a boom that was good for everyone in the music industry. It was good for you if you made something that you could play at home, or home recording. It was not good if you made giant stadium PA systems.
But the popularity of acoustic guitars also means more trees being cut down. So Martin says it's made a big push towards sustainability.
They're called rare exotic timbers for a reason, because they're becoming more rare and more exotic. So we not only have to be more judicious in how we use these traditional woods, we absolutely, positively have to look for alternatives.
While Martin guitars may be expensive, price isn't the only consideration for dedicated guitarists.
When you put the money into a guitar, you expect it to really respond. It's almost like it's a part of you. It's an extension of the artist. And why would you not want to have the best that you possibly can afford?
And though high-end guitars tend to age like wines, increasing in value and quality over time, Chris says players shouldn't buy Martins as just a monetary investment.
Having a Martin guitar that you can play is more fun than looking at your 401k account. And if at the end of the day your old Martin guitar was worth more than your 401k account, bonus.
Edgar Evans has worked as a master blower with Waterford Crystal for 39 years.
Started when I was 15, left school on a Friday and into Waterford Crystal on a Monday.
He is one of about 70 master craftspeople who work at the company's headquarters in Waterford, Ireland, many of whom are following in their parents' footsteps.
I had brothers, uncles, dad was in here, so you kind of always want to follow your family job.
But becoming a master craftsperson is no easy feat. Candidates must first graduate from Waterford's 8-year-long apprenticeship programme, learning from and working directly with certified artisans at the facilities. A single handmade piece of Waterford crystal will pass through the hands of about 10 master craftspeople like Edgar before it can be shipped and sold.
It's handmade, start to finish, so it's your own breath, your own hands, all the way through.
Even the initial design is analogue. Every piece begins its life as a hand-drawn sketch.
I still go back to the old pencil and paper at the start. You have to, because that's how to get your ideas down fast.
Matt Kehoe, a senior designer, has worked at Waterford for 30 years.
I choose Waterford because I'm a Waterford man. I'm born and bred. I'm always proud of being from Waterford and the fact that we had a luxury brand on our doorstep.
Waterford has released hundreds of designs since it was established in 1783. The most iconic is the Lismore pattern, which debuted in 1952. But the most popular design today, according to Matt, is this one, Irish Lace, a modern design inspired by traditional Irish needlework.
It took probably a year and a half to develop because of the shape. We knew the pattern, but we didn't know the shape at the time.
A pair of red wine glasses in Irish lace costs $380. A bowl with the design goes for $675. Matt works closely with the rest of the team throughout the production process to ensure the designs fit his vision.
It was various 3D modelling packages to bring it to life. It helps me see, even though from experience I know what it's going to look like, but it helps me let other people see what it's going to look like before we make a prototype. They have to be able to get into your head and I have to be able to get into their head and how they can perform. Different blowers, different cutters will produce different things in different ways. So for example, if I was to design a bespoke piece, I would probably go to a particular cutter.
Once he has finalised a design and shape, his first stop is the mould room.
I'd start a mould and I give the mould maker a template of, say this for example is the Irish lace. So he'll take that and he'll make the mould and get it ready for the blower.
There are two types of moulds, wooden and steel. The wooden moulds can only be used 10 to 15 times because the extreme heat from the molten crystal breaks them down. Once the mould is ready, the next stop is the blower, who breathes life into Matt's designs.
It's a pull stem and it's usually done by a machine, but here in Waterford it's made by hand and it's a team of 4 people.
One of those 4 people is Edgar. He's typically accompanied by a master stemmer and 2 apprentices who assist with tasks like creating the ball of glass the master blower will use for the piece.
There's no individuals in here. It's teamwork all the way through, but we often even socialise together, kill each other, make up again.
Crystal contains a small percentage of minerals, often lead, to make it more durable than glass. Waterford recently transitioned from lead-based crystal to a new recyclable lead-free formula containing barium oxide, which the company says is twice as durable and more heat-resistant. It says both formulas are regularly tested and are safe for use. Before they can begin blowing the mixture, artisans heat it to around 1100 degrees in a kiln.
And by the time I get it to the mould, it's probably 400 or 500 degrees.
Edgar says staying safe when working with such high temperatures comes down to years of experience and careful teamwork. Edgar estimates he blows 300 to 350 pieces of stemware a day. When working on large pieces like vases, he blows around 50 to 60. After blowing, the pieces are put through a special annealing process that gradually cools the glass over 24 hours. Cooling the glass slowly is essential to prevent it from breaking. The rims are then polished and any extra bits are cut off, smashed, and melted back into the raw mixture.
After the blowing side of things, we'll bring it down to the cutting shop and we'll get the pattern marked up on the glass. I generally, when it's a prototype, I'll mark up the glass, mark the pattern and give it to the cutter and talk to the cutter and discuss exactly what he would like.
Though these marks serve as a basic guide, each cutter is expected to memorise over 100 designs. And the designs are far from simple.
Some of the pieces could have up to 96 cuts on them.
David Boyce is a master cutter who has worked for Waterford for 37 years. He was initially part of a group of 7 apprentices accepted into the programme in 1986.
We were called throughout the whole factory the Magnificent Seven.
Like Edgar, David's father also worked at Waterford.
I was very interested in the crystal, so one day he brought me in on the tour of the factory, and while I was in on the tour of the factory I said, Dad, this is what I want to be, I says.
Cutting requires careful focus and a steady hand. Artisans must apply just enough pressure to make the cut without shattering the piece.
We'd be nervous cutting the pieces, but after you doing hundreds of these pieces down through the years, you're so used to them now that you can literally cut them with your eyes closed.
They use diamond-tipped wheels for speed and precision. The wheel is kept wet at all times with a constant flow of water.
The reason why the water is on the wheel is to keep the wheel from heating up, not to burn into the glass. And if the wheel gets too hot, if you don't have enough water on the wheel, the glass can actually shatter on the wheel.
In a single day, the cutters can go through as many as 120 pieces of stemware.
It's important to say that all of those processes that we do, from the hand carving of the mould making, to the mouth blowing, to the marking, and then to the hand cutting using diamond-tipped wheels, are ancient craft techniques that have been used for centuries. So while we evolve in terms of some materials that we may use, we're still leaning back into the ancient craft of crystal making.
For prototypes, Matt makes sure they match his vision and are up to his standard.
I review each piece when it's cut to see if it's what I want, and if it's not, we'll literally go back to the drawing board.
In addition to cutters who work on the tableware, Waterford employs sculptors and engravers who can create custom art pieces, like this ocean sculpture, which costs about $33,000. The finished product is sold in Waterford's in-house store or shipped all over the world. Waterford says the biggest buyer of its crystal is the United States, and one of the most prominent pieces Waterford has made there is the Times Square Ball in New York City. It's about 12 feet in diameter and consists of 2,688 Waterford crystal triangles. Waterford also makes custom pieces for high-profile institutions such as the British royal family.
So we had no less than Prince Charles, now King Charles of England, and Camilla come to visit us here at Waterford. So it was an exciting visit to welcome royalty, and again they're very familiar with the Waterford brand.
But it's not just royalty who are fans of the crystal. Many of the craftspeople themselves are also avid collectors.
I have many pieces going back down through the years to Waterford. I constantly use them at home as well.
I think everything in my house that I drink out is Waterford. I don't drink out of anything else.
And Matt says he can't imagine going anywhere else anytime soon either.
Can't see myself ever working for any other company. I think designing for Waterford is something special.
But at Bespoke Ateliers on and around Savile Row in London's Mayfair district, tailors craft one-of-a-kind garments completely from scratch. Bespoke suits are infinitely customizable, but they take much longer to produce. The process requires close, personal interaction with the client. On Savile Row, you're not just paying for the suit, you're paying for the tailor.
Every tailor
A hairdresser has a different style, a different approach, so you just have to find the right one for you.
Catherine Sargent became the only female master tailor working on Savile Row after opening a shop on the street in 2016. Today, her shop is located within the so-called Golden Mile of Savile Row on nearby Brook Street. Catherine has worked with many high-profile clients over the years, most of whom she's not allowed to mention.
Made a coronation uniforms for a king, and I was flown to their country to have the fittings.
And not all are human.
We have fitted out their four-legged friend before, so yeah, a bespoke dog coat with a couple of those.
To become a member of the Savile Row Bespoke Association, tailors must work within a specific area of London, offer 2,000 different fabrics, and cut each suit from a unique paper pattern.
Even a try-on is a major event.
The months-long suit-making process starts with the consultation, a chance for the tailor to get to know their client and their needs. Today, her client is Richard Stoppard, a local finance executive who is looking to buy his very first bespoke suit from Savile Row.
I really wanted to treat myself to something that I thought gave me a little bit more gravitas, a little bit more standing. I'm not going to lie and say that it's a small amount of money, but I see it as a smart investment.
Early on, Catherine establishes basic details like the suit type and materials. But she also takes time to develop a relationship with each client by asking specific personal questions.
There's a person at the heart of the creation. It's not just the tailor and their interpretation. You know, you're making something that's really truly bespoke.
She says the only struggle is managing expectations.
Every man that I make a suit for wants to look like James Bond. It shouldn't be like an intimidating experience. It should be really like super relaxed and very, informative.
During the first meeting, she carefully takes the client's measurements. With these, Catherine crafts the most crucial piece of the bespoke suit, the paper pattern. Patterns are two-dimensional representations of each garment with instructions on how pieces should fit together. Catherine keeps every client's pattern on hand for future orders.
Pattern cutting, fitting, problem solving, it's always shapes and dimensions, 2D to 3D, and I'm kind of like a tailoring nerd in that way.
Catherine works meticulously to ensure each piece is drawn to scale. But as precise as she is here, sometimes the client's size may change during the process.
You measure somebody and then they come for a fitting and they've changed shape, lost weight or gained weight, and the measurements change, but we make the garments and the patterns so we can adapt them for that.
Once she's done sketching, she carefully cuts out each shape.
These are my paper shears. Every time we do a fitting, we take it from 3D to 2D and back again. So we're constantly working on the pattern and altering the pattern.
Catherine uses these initial patterns to figure out how much cloth she needs. The most commonly used fabric is British wool.
You can shape it, you can stretch it, you can shrink it. It is a joy to work with.
She gets most of her fabrics from storied London cloth merchants, like Holland and Sherry, where the fabrics are often locally sourced. A typical jacket made from British wool starts at around £4,350. But some materials can boost the price significantly, like cashmere or vicuña wool from Peru.
That cloth is probably the most expensive cloth in the world, and for an overcoat you would be talking upwards of £20,000.
Catherine says she prefers robust materials because her goal is to create a suit that lasts for decades. The next step is striking or marking up the cloth with a sharpened piece of tailor's chalk.
With a piece of chalk, you can get a really nice sharp edge and get a really lovely curve. You tend to do those curves freehand.
Catherine leaves extra cloth on the edges in case she needs to lengthen it. It's called the inlay, and it remains inside the final suit, so the garment can be altered even years later if needed.
So a garment that's made by hand, by us, would hopefully last 10, 15, 20 years, even longer than that if people take care of their clothes.
Once the fabric is marked, she cuts out the rough shape of the suit. On Savile Row, a master cutter is never without their high-quality steel scissors.
My tailoring shears I've had for over 25 years. I've never had them sharpened. They've sort of become an extension of you, so I really don't want to get any new ones. I think they'll probably last me throughout my career. The tailoring shears are designed to glide, so when you cut the cloth, you're not actually lifting the shears up in the air. It allows you to really get a nice control, a nice straight line over the cloth. For me, this is the sort of most relaxing, easiest part of the job. Like just the noise is very satisfying. You know you've sort of accomplished something, you've made a pattern, and you're now going to see this garment come together.
At this stage, Catherine hands this bundle over to her apprentice, Emma Warner. Working off of Catherine's chalk guidelines, Emma does a first pressing of the fabric and arranges the pieces. Then she uses a thick white thread called basting thread to hand stitch the cut pieces of cloth together and shape it into a wearable garment.
I'm going to use the hem for the top part because you want to keep the shape in the jacket. If it's canvas like this, you will have the shape of the bust in the canvas more than if you would do it on the flat. So that's why we're using it now. But then later we also use it to press the collar because the collar is also on a round.
This basted suit is what the client tries on at the first fitting. The loose stitching allows Catherine to easily take it apart and make any necessary adjustments.
To make sure that it's exactly as they want it to be before we go ahead and take it further. How does it feel under the arms?
Yes, plenty of
Is it
room,
comfortable?
I think, yeah.
It's not too low.
No.
Can you move around freely?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah? This one looks good. This one looks a little bit short, doesn't it?
During the first fitting, Catherine marks any adjustments on the cloth in chalk using a special tailoring code.
A straight line would mean shorten or take in, and a line with a cross like that would mean let out or lengthen.
Once the client is happy, the garment is broken down and flattened again. Catherine updates the paper pattern to reflect any changes. For bespoke suits, clients usually come in for 2 or 3 fittings, during which minute adjustments are made to make sure every measurement is exactly right. After weeks of back and forth, the suit finally starts to take shape. At this stage, tailors add wool padding to the shoulders and the collar to give the suit its structure.
We actually put shape into the garment at this point, so when you try it on next time, you'll just see that it's got a little bit more form to it. It's not a flat shape.
Once the client and the tailor are happy with the suit, it's sent out for finishing, in which artisans attach the lining and stitch the edges. The suit then needs to be pressed to make sure it's perfectly crisp and flat for the client. It might look like normal ironing, but this step is essential to maintaining Savile Row's high standards. And there are few in the business who can press a garment like George.
I was taught by a presser in which he was doing it for 60 years, so I suppose you could say that I inherited 60 years experience. There's no one we haven't pressed for, and we currently press for around about 95% of the industry at the moment.
As with every other stage of the tailoring, the presser pays close attention to detail, making sure there's not a single wrinkle in any of the fabric.
Give the back drape a really nice clean finish, and the back of the sleeves, the fullness are all pressed out really nicely, and then we'll concentrate back on the front again and just complete the front by pressing these lapel edges and making sure we've got a good decent crease down here and a natural roll towards the end. That's pretty much it.
After months of work, Richard returns one last time to try on the final suit. and to make sure everything is just as he imagined.
I think it's interesting on how wearing the suit makes me feel. At the moment, slightly emboldened, luxuriant. It's an interesting, sort of quite emotional experience, if I'm honest.
You can normally tell as soon as they put something on, like they just kind of like their posture might be a little bit different. Looking at something on the body in the mirror for the first time when it's completely finished can be quite daunting, but once they've left the building with the garments and they've started wearing them, we quite often get good feedback saying, oh my gosh, it's really brilliant, and people stop me and ask me where did I get the suit made.
Catherine started as an apprentice in 1996, and by 2016 she had made history by becoming the first female head cutter and master tailor on Savile Row. Now, others are following in her footsteps. The Savile Row Bespoke Association says it's added more than 50 apprentices since 2004, and Catherine has noticed more women in this new crop of aspiring master tailors.
I think gender should not be a barrier to following your passion and your love for this craft. So many women are now becoming tailors and cutters, so it's really great to see. It's something I'm personally very proud of. A lot of the customers are still male, and the perception, I think, from a lot of the houses are that cutters should therefore be male. That doesn't matter at all to me, and we've proved that it does work, and a woman can do this job equally as well as any man, if not sometimes better.
これが伊藤牧場の、サーロインです。月齢は、40ヶ月のサーロインですので。
Hiroki Ito is a third-generation Matsusaka Wagyu farmer. On his farm in Tsu, Mie Prefecture, you will find only virgin female cows. It's the primary requirement for any of the 80 Matsusaka Wagyu farms here in the Mie Prefecture.
オスよりもメスの方が、味も美味しいですし、柔らかさもメスの方が柔らかいです。匂いでいうと香りがいいですし、味でいうと甘い味ですし、柔らかさでいうと口の中に入れたらとろけると。
Matsusaka beef has long been praised for its extremely low melting point, which is half that of other types of Wagyu. This means that when cooking, the fat melts in a shorter time.
融点が低いのでちょっと溶けてきていますけど、この融点もこの指で触ると分かるようにこうスッとへっこんでいきますね。融点が低いと滑るんですよ。この光っとるように手もね滑ります。
To reach this intense marbling, old generations of farmers like Hideo, Hiroki's dad, used to feed cows with beer.
昔は食体を起こした牛、食が落ちてきた牛に1代目の正和が与えてまして、でそれを僕は若い折に一緒に手伝って当時関わって飲ましたことはあります。普通の一般の元は昔はキリンビールとかそういうので普通一般的な銘柄はありません。僕が宿農しましたのが25歳の時でございますから、今73歳でございます。誰がビールを飲ましとるっていうのは、まず私は今はもうなくなったと思ってるんですけど。
Although there's no evidence that this practice increases a cow's appetite, many associate Matsusaka Wagyu with it. The fact that Matsusaka has kept a relatively low profile internationally has almost transformed this practice into a legend.
やっぱりそんなに好きじゃなさそうだったんですけど、どうなんですか？口から飲むっていうのを強制的にやっとるもんで、多分飲んでからあとはほろほろ酔いながら食欲増してると思います。
Hiroki doesn't practice this anymore. Instead, he has perfected the feed and is practicing circular agriculture.
そしてそこから取れたお米から取れる稲わらです。胃の中を整える役割で最初にこのわらは食べさせます。この後、濃厚飼料を与えます。ふすま麦、大豆かす、トウモロコシと配合されていまして、 そして濃厚飼料は肉をつけるためですね。牛を大きくするのに与えるのが濃厚飼料です。
The cost of feed is an important factor that drives the prices up. To reach that soft marbling, Matsusaka cows need to eat a lot. They also need to eat for a much longer time than other cows.
1.5 倍ぐらいはかかっています。
Matsusaka cows are raised for 30 to 32 months, 6 months longer than other Japanese black cattle. Everything adds up over time for Hiroki. The costs of feeding, temperature control, air circulation, and cleaning the enclosures regularly to avoid flies.
100万で子牛を仕入れたら、そこから肥育で100万円経費がかかりますので、200万円かかっているということになります。
Farmers here call this raising period fattening. For the first 3 to 4 months, cattle eat grass to develop a strong digestive system. This is called the belly creation period. Then comes the finishing period, where cattle gradually switch to concentrated feed and rice straw to fatten up. Hiroki is now experimenting with even longer periods of fattening, raising his cattle from 35 up to 40 months. But raising cows for such a long time can also be dangerous for Hiroki, as a cow could get sick and die.
その長期肥育をしている間に当然牛の寿命というのがありますから、肥育期間が長いと当然人間でも一緒ですが、病気になったり、食欲不振になったり、あと体感の温度が感じにくくなったりと。でやっぱり長期肥育というのはいろんな面で体に負担がかかってしまいます。
A cow at the end of its fattening period is a true treasure. Every year, Matsusaka cows get auctioned off and one gets crowned Queen of Matsusaka. While the highest ever price for one of these cows was 50 million yen in 2002, this auction has never really seen a low price, averaging around 20 million yen. Events like the auction have also fostered another legend, that farmers in Matsusaka massage their cows with alcohol. This time, it is not to improve their appetite, but their appearance.
うちはその生体の予選会で通った牛だけやります。生体の外から見る優勝を競う牛については必ずそういう掃除をしてきれいに出さなあかんっていうことやもんで、けどもうちの牧場は清めとしてやります。はい、こうするとこういう形になってド派手に見せたいもの。ビールよかはやられてる方の方が多いと思います。
It's not just adult cows that cost a lot. Calves can be very expensive.
この子牛は約100万ぐらいです。
Hiroki doesn't raise his cattle from birth. At 10 months old, calves are also sold at auctions throughout Japan. Hiroki spends almost half of his time at work buying calves, and he's very demanding.
まずは、顔を見ます。そして額が広い眉間といいますかね、額が広い牛は口が大きいので餌も食い込みもいいということで、あと角も綺麗な角を整っとる牛をまず見まして、その次に後ろから、お尻の方を見て、尻尾の上がり下がりとか、体格とか、全体的にしっかりした肥育できる牛を選びます。この子牛は抜群に最高級の BMS12 がもう私の中ではもう確定しています。
BMS12 is the highest marbling grade for Wagyu in Japan. The more intense the marbling, the higher the price. For customers in Tokyo, 100 grams of sirloin costs 10,000 yen. But that's still much less than what Parisians are paying at Mariagania, where the same cut is sold at 360 euros. The most premium cut, tenderloin, sells for 5,000 euros per kilogram.
Comme on a bien respecté la température, le melting point c'est très bon. Dès que j'ai mis dans ma bouche, ça fond directement. C'est Donc, comme on a la chaleur naturelle de la bouche, donc ça aide à atteindre la température qu'on a besoin. Donc, ça prend secondes. C'est pas ma première fois de goûter ça, mais chaque fois que je goûte, j'ai rien à dire.
The Paris restaurant was the first to successfully export Matsusaka Wagyu out of Japan and include it on its menu. Its most expensive tasting menu costs €520. Matsusaka Wagyu is heavily regulated. To include Matsusaka beef on the menu, the restaurant had to follow strict rules. The Paris restaurant needed to apply for a license, which took a year to be accredited. To maintain it, the restaurant needs to have a high rating on Google Maps, and there can't be another restaurant serving Matsusaka Wagyu within an 840-metre radius. As of 2023, Hiroki has shipped only 3 cows to Maria Canea. Due to this limited supply, the €520 menu with Ito Ranch's premium tenderloin is served to only 1 table per day. This exclusivity is set to get a little bit looser. In the last 10 years, Japan has been a major importer of US beef, importing an average of $1.83 billion a year. Meanwhile, millions worth of Wagyu made the opposite journey as it reached international fame. A decline in tourism after the COVID-19 outbreak and a change in consumer behaviour toward cheaper meats exacerbated this. And now, Japanese cattle farmers are looking outside the country's borders. The export quota for Matsusaka has jumped from 24 in 2022 to 700 in 2024. Of those, it's the most premium cuts that are exported, going to high-end restaurants like Maria Canea in Paris. This is pushing farmers who want to ship abroad to bet on those lucrative but dangerous long fattening periods.
45ヶ月と私も初めに世界初この45ヶ月で出すっていうのは生まれた。
To answer that question, you have to understand what a tourbillon is. In a mechanical watch, there is a balance wheel attached to a coiled hairspring which allows it to twist back and forth. This movement causes another wheel, called an escape wheel, to advance tooth by tooth in regular intervals, creating the signature ticking sound you hear in a watch. In a tourbillon, however, this entire mechanism, called an escapement, is placed inside a metal cage, which is also constantly rotating. This additional rotation is what counteracted gravity's pull in pocket watches. These days, pocket watches have been replaced with modern wristwatches that primarily sit horizontally, so they don't require a tourbillon for accuracy. But for some reason, it's not only highly sought after, it's often featured prominently and can increase the cost of a watch significantly.
Because it's so incredibly difficult to master and make, it's going to add a significant cost to the watch. So you can see, a watch that's a simple time-only piece jump 20,000, 30,000, sometimes 100,000.
How difficult is it? Just ask Remy Coles, a 26-year-old independent watchmaker who specialises in all parts of the tourbillon making process.
Mon travail, c'est un peu chef d'orchestre. Je dois faire un peu tous les différents travaux que peut être un artisan et un chef d'entreprise.
His studio is located near Lake Annecy in France, about 30 miles from Geneva, the watch capital of the world, where top brands like Patek Philippe and Rolex are headquartered. He and his colleague, Clémence Thiriard, are in the process of creating Rémy's second collection of tourbillon watches, of 36 pieces he calls the tourbillon atelier.
Moi, ce que je trouve fascinant sur le tourbillon, c'est qu'on a vraiment cet esprit de mouvement dans la montre, le fait d'avoir comme un cœur qui bat au niveau du mouvement, et c'est vraiment une complication qui est vivante.
It takes about a month to complete a watch from start to finish, so Remy and Clémence will be working on them for the next 3 years. One reason these watches cost so much is the sheer number of pieces needed for the tourbillon to function. The entire watch consists of about 200 parts in total, 50 of which make up the tourbillon, and each of these has to be extremely precise, down to the thousandth of a millimeter. Rémi's tourbillon is made from components cut from brass and steel. He sculpts the raw materials himself into the basic shapes using a CNC to cut the various pinions and wheels with precision.
Les mesures soient bonnes et là du coup c'est en train de commencer à usiner le composant.
While automated, machining all these tiny pieces takes a long time, about 15 to 20 minutes for each of the smaller parts, and an hour plus for more complex ones. Rémi must then compare each individual component with the initial design on the computer to make sure it's exactly to the specifications and that nothing is outside of the lines.
Donc la pièce est bonne, il n'y a aucun problème.
For each piece, he has to readjust various settings, like the cutting speed, and this can sometimes take longer than the actual machining. The cut metal needs to be heat treated multiple times to reinforce it. First, this happens through a process called quenching, where the steel is heated up and then quickly cooled with charcoal powder.
Et du coup, toutes nos pièces sont trempées de cette manière-là, parce que là c'est vraiment très très cassant, c'est comme du verre.
He then heats the piece again, tempering it, which changes the color from yellow to brown to blue. From here on out, it requires a careful eye and a steady hand. To craft this circular piece into a mechanical gear, he will then need to manually cut each of the 80 teeth into the base. Rémi will often stack 10 of them together to save time.
Donc voilà, on est une des dernières entreprises à tailler les roues avec cette méthode-là, dit taillage dent par dent traditionnel. On a des codes de plus ou moins 4-5 microns, donc du coup ce qui représente 1 micron, c'est 1 millième de millimètre. Donc là voilà, c'est un travail qui... Voilà, on est très peu de personnes maintenant à pouvoir faire ce travail.
Rémi and Clémence are both graduates of Lycée Edgar Faure in Morteau, France, a school renowned for training and passing on some of the best young watchmakers into the big-name Swiss watch companies.
J'y étais pendant 6 ans. C'est selon moi une des meilleures écoles d'horlogerie.
He worked briefly for Grubel Forsey in Switzerland before establishing his own brand in 2019, and Clémence worked at Patek Philippe before joining him. She is Rémi's first and only employee and has been with the company for about a year.
Mon arrière-grand-père était horloger. Mon grand-père m'en a beaucoup parlé quand j'étais petite. Depuis que j'ai l'âge de 13 ans, j'ai envie de faire ce métier.
Nowhere is all of this training, passion and attention to detail more apparent than in the stage known as chamfering.
C'est vraiment de l'artisanal, donc c'est là qu'on voit vraiment la présence de la main de l'horloger et de la main de l'artisan.
It's also one of the most time-consuming parts of the process, in which each edge is meticulously beveled, not only for aesthetics, but also to reduce friction and prevent any unintended resistance with the pieces.
L'anglage, c'est simplement en fait de venir casser les arêtes à 90 degrés avec un angle à 45, et c'est le plus difficile à réaliser parce que ça demande beaucoup de technique et de savoir-faire. Pour vous donner un titre d'exemple, pour finir une seule roue, on passe entre 7 et 8 heures. Pour une seule roue, pour une seule montre. Donc du coup, vu qu'il y a 3 roues par montre, ça fait beaucoup d'heures passées pour faire des finitions.
The chamfered component is polished and coated with metal, such as gold or rhodium, to prevent oxidation and add a colourful lustre, yellow, pink or grey, depending on the coating used.
C'est une opération qui est assez délicate et assez précise.
Rémi will first experiment with different test pieces to make sure the colours are just as desired. There are various types and styles of tourbillon, single axis, triple axis, and even flying tourbillon, which are only mounted on one side. Some cages make one full rotation every 60 seconds, as is the case with Remy's watch. Some are slower and some are faster, but the faster the rotation, the more fragile the mechanism, which is already extremely fragile, especially when it comes to the hairspring. On any particular day, Clémence's tasks can differ. Today, she is assembling the pieces Remy has already prepared into the tourbillon cage. First, she tests the balance of the balance wheel and then cuts the hairspring to the correct length to match it.
Voilà, la machine simule le mouvement d'oscillation d'alternance dans le balancier et du coup, elle va permettre de pouvoir définir la bonne longueur.
She wears an eyepiece, known as a loupe, to shape the curve and make a slight elevation of the outermost coil, known as the Breguet overcoil.
Donc là, je viens d'assembler le spiral au balancier.
When it's just right, she will piece it all together in the cage, using a variety of small pliers and other specialized tools.
Alors là, je suis en train de visser les vis de la cage, donc ce qui ferme l'ensemble en fait. Donc là, mon spiral est mis en place dans la cage de tourbillon, dans la cage test. Donc voilà, comme on peut voir, il est libre. Il faut beaucoup de patience.
Mounting the tourbillon can take several days to get right. Remy will then check everything and place the movement in the platinum watch casing. They will do some final control tests and make sure it's tightly sealed and waterproof before scanning the watch one last time for any dust particles. So much time and effort go into making the tourbillon mechanism, and customers are willing to pay for it. But why, when it doesn't make watches more accurate?
Every time you pick up a timepiece, no matter what the price is, you're looking at a piece of art. Really, this is about buying what you love and buying what speaks to you.
The tourbillons are often even highlighted with a single sapphire crystal. At Watches of Switzerland, one of the largest luxury watch retailers in the world, customers can find tourbillon watches from most of the big names. But Kelly Yock, who has been in the industry for 28 years, says it's also her job to show collectors the broad range available from independent makers, whom they may not have even heard of yet.
It's up to us to educate the public when they walk through our doors on what other things they should have in their collection. I love anyone that takes the time to truly build an art piece like this from start to finish. I really believe if you love what you do, you're going to appreciate someone like Remy wholeheartedly.
Take this highly detailed Year of the Dragon themed tourbillon from Beauvais, for example. It is one of only 12 pieces new for 2024 that sells for around $500,000.
I think what's really important to showcase is the back of this watch as well, because you are truly looking at something that takes someone so many hours to do, and this is a true piece of art. Flipping that watch over and really looking at the artistry and how much work goes into decorating movement. It's extraordinary, and the geeky side of me, I would sit and probably stare at a tourbillon for hours on end.
Although making sous filindeu is complex, the ingredients are simple: semolina flour, water, and salt. Luca mixes them together to form a dough.
Io fin da piccolo ero il classico bambino che quando vedevo mamma impastare, qualsiasi cosa lei facesse, ero sempre in mezzo. E poi per farmi stare buono mi davano un pezzo di pasta impastata e mi facevano giocare. Piano piano ho iniziato a lavorare, a fare un po' tutto.
Getting the dough completely smooth can take up to 20 minutes.
È una pasta che ha tante varianti, il clima, l'umidità, il caldo, e lì devi essere bravo a capire quando dare più acqua, quando darne di meno.
He alternates between adding drops of salt brine and fresh water as he needs.
Sembrano solo frasi fatte, ma è vero, la pasta la senti cambiare, la pasta quasi parla con te e ti dice ok, sono pronta. Al tatto deve sentirsi liscio e vellutato.
Stretching is the key to Su-Filindeu's thin strands. In one swift motion, Luca folds the dough in half to make 2 pieces, then 4, then 8. He continues until he forms 256 perfectly even threads of pasta. Each one is as thin as a strand of hair.
Non esiste macchinario per fare i filindeu, è una pratica che può essere fatta solo ed esclusivamente con le mani.
Luca has to be careful not to break any of the strands as he places them on a traditional wicker base called a fundu. It's made of asphodel, a plant that grows throughout the region.
L'asfodelo ha la grande capacità di aiutare nell'essiccazione la pasta e poi di dare anche un sapore in più a quello che sarà poi il risultato finale una volta cucinato.
Layering is the key to Su-Filindeu's mesh-like design. It's also the trickiest step of the process for Luca. The strands cannot be moved once they are on the fundu, so he has to be precise. He removes any excess dough from the edges before working on the next section.
È importante essere il più veloci possibili, in quanto lo strato inferiore si va a attaccare a quello superiore. Se lo strato inferiore è asciutto, quello superiore non si attacca e quindi in fase di cottura si disfa.
Luca only has 20 minutes to finish all 3 layers.
Questo è il lavoro ultimato.
For the people of Nuoro, Su-Filindeu is sacred. Traditionally, the dish was prepared only twice a year during celebrations to honor St. Francis. Pilgrims from Nuoro would travel 20 miles to his shrine. Women from a local family would gather and prepare bowls of Su-Filindeu for those who completed the trek.
Tradizionale è cucinarlo con un brodo di pecora e condirlo con del formaggio pecorino fresco fatto inacidire.
This hasn't changed since at least the 19th century.
Su-Filindeu, è vero, era un lavoro prettamente femminile, o meglio, una lavorazione prettamente femminile.
But generations of secrecy have left only a handful of people in Nuoro with the knowledge and interest to make the dish. In 2021, a Su-Filindeu maker from the family divulged the recipe to other women in the community in an effort to keep the dish from disappearing. Other Nuoro residents like Luca stepped in to keep the tradition alive. But for him, finding a teacher was impossible.
Non avendo ricevuto risposte positive dalle persone a cui avevo chiesto di insegnarmelo.
Luca decided to take matters into his own hands.
Perché devono farlo solo le donne?
Slowly, Luca started getting inquiries from chefs in Canada, England, China, Germany, and beyond.
Questa dimostrazione che è una pasta richiestissima e conosciutissima anche oltre confini nazionali, non solo della nostra isola.
Over 6,000 miles away outside of Los Angeles, one of Luca's students is bringing a new life to Su-Filindeu. Chef Rob Gentile has spent over 20 years bringing the flavors of his Italian background to fine dining restaurants in Canada and the US.
It was always this, holy grail of pasta. I always wanted to learn how to make it. It's just one of those things. It's like, before I die, I want to know how to make Su-Filindeu.
For years, Rob struggled to find a teacher. But when the masters in Nuoro finally began sharing their knowledge, he jumped at the opportunity.
It started to become how do we keep this tradition alive? How do we encourage the people who are excited about it to foster this amazing product. And this is where I met Luca.
Rob spent hours watching and learning how to knead and stretch the dough in Luca's home.
I was like, I can do this. It's not that difficult because Luca made it look so easy. It was a very memorable moment my entire life. It was like, couldn't even believe this.
Now Rob is featuring su-philindeyu on the menu at his restaurant, Stella West Hollywood.
I just felt like it was something special that people needed to try. And every time I've introduced someone to it, it's a magical thing to eat.
As su-philindeyu expands to restaurants outside of Sardinia, awareness of the dish's cultural and religious significance could fade over time. But Luca and Rob believe that shouldn't stop people from sharing how to make it.
Purtroppo non tutti sono d'accordo a insegnarlo fuori, però io ho sempre detto che portare fuori questa pasta non toglie nulla alla paternità della pasta stessa.
I think that it can be appreciated as a technique in a pasta, and we could do things like zuppa di pesce with it and have fun with it, but it can also be celebrated as the religious tradition that it is. It's an exciting time for su-philindeyu because it's never really been anywhere else outside of Sardinia, and now it is.
And though the pasta is finding new homes, the tradition is still under threat in its birthplace. That's because to make the pasta the authentic way, you need a fundu. And there are not that many people left making them.
In questo momento stiamo andando a Olzai a far visita a una delle ultime maestre dell'intreccio della sfodelo. Permesso? Si può? Ciao.
Giovanna Porci has been weaving since she was a small child.
Io ho iniziato a fare la sfodelo perché quando si alzava mamma che andava a fare qualche cosa, io di nascosto andavo e facevo qualche pezzettino, no? Però lei se ne accorgeva subito che lo doveva disfare, che io non lo facevo bene.
She starts by cutting the asphodel into thin strips. This tool is made from cow bone. Giovanna uses it to weave the plant into a round base. In Sardinia, women have passed down asphodel weaving for generations. It was a source of income for people like Giovanna's mother.
Paesi d'intorno, nei dintorni, andava a vendere i cestini, questi che ci sono attaccati al muro. Quindi faceva questo lavoro per guadagnare i soldi, per dare da mangiare ai suoi figli.
But today the trade has virtually disappeared, with only a few weavers remaining.
Infatti ancora oggi non mi spiego com'è possibile che una tradizione che ha fruttato così tanto alle persone stia andando piano piano a morire, a spegnersi.
Giovanna says young people haven't shown any interest in learning the craft. She's tried to teach women in her community, but she says it hasn't caught on.
E va nei mercati a vendere, già li vende, solo che non c'è chi li fa. Non è rimasto più nessuno, non lo so, io sono orgogliosa di farlo perché mi piace, però sono stanca anch'io, capito?
Like weaving, the art of making su-philindeyu in Nuoro is anything but widespread.
Nel senso che essendo poche le persone che lo producono, hai difficoltà a produrlo in quantità.
This limited production has also made the pasta expensive. 1 kilo can cost 26 to 30 euros, around 15 times the average price of pasta in Italy. But Luca doesn't believe selling it is the key to keeping this tradition alive.
Una pasta sacra è legata quindi a San Francesco, a un santo che ha fatto un voto di povertà, e non mi sembra moralmente corretto e giusto fare dei soldi su questa pasta.
Instead, his focus is teaching it to others, and he's putting his faith in people like Rob to bring the dish worldwide.
They're part of culture, they're part of a cuisine. It's just something that should be taught, it should be carried on, it should move forward.
che essendo comunque la Sardegna una terra ricca di tradizione, sarebbe fantastico che domani ci si svegliasse e magari qualcuno è venuto all'idea di introdurre queste tradizioni e poterle insegnare nelle scuole.
While Luca doesn't know what the future holds, he's proud of the work he's doing to keep Threads of God alive.
Northern Okayama's high-quality rice and groundwater have made it a hub for sake brewing. Gozenshu Brewery has been operating here since 1804. Maiko is the 7th generation of sake brewers in her family.
子供の時は自分の家がお酒を作っているっていうなんかプレッシャーみたいなのがあったんですけど。
The brewery goes through 140 tons of omachi rice every year. Most sake rice varieties are created by crossbreeding other strains. This isn't the case with naturally occurring omachi. It gives the sake an earthy and herbal flavour.
おまち米っていう地元のお米はすごく膨らみがあって旨味の出るお米なんですけど。
The rice arrives at the brewery already milled and polished. Maiko and her team start by washing it thoroughly to get rid of any excess powder. The rice then sits in vats of cold water to soak, and every second is crucial. If it absorbs too much moisture, the rice will be sticky and not good for mold growth. The more polished the rice is, the quicker the water will soak in. Workers spend up to half an hour watching for a subtle colour change. They know it's ready when the outside of the grain turns white. By the next day, the rice is ready for another critical step: steaming. Workers transfer it into barrels called goshiki. In the past, they were made of cedar wood, but those were replaced with aluminium ones in the mid-20th century. Maiko uses this wooden tool to spread the rice evenly. The cloth traps the heat and allows steam to escape. The rice steams for 50 minutes. Then it's time to add one of the most important ingredients, koji mold. It's a type of fungus used in many fermented foods like soy sauce, miso, and vinegar. As the koji grows, it converts the rice starch into sugar. But for that to happen, the rice needs to be kept at a steady temperature. If it gets too hot, the fungus will die. This conveyor belt blows air to cool down the rice as Maiko sprinkles on the koji. Once the mould is added, it's a race to get the rice from the chilly brewery floor to the humid 33 degrees Celsius mould room upstairs. Workers spend an hour and a half massaging the koji into the rice, making sure the mould reaches each and every grain.
この仕事の大変なところはやっぱり体を使う仕事なので。
Maiko never expected to make sake brewing a career. It's always been a male-dominated industry. In 2020, out of the 1,200 sake breweries in Japan, only 20 were run by women.
うちの母親はやっぱり女性だし、大変な仕事っていうのを知ってたので。
It wasn't until Maiko started drinking sake herself that she realized this was the job for her.
この写真は、15年前ぐらいに、私が杜氏になったばっかりの時の写真です。みんな本当に若かったので、経験もない中で本当に一生懸命もう無我夢中でお酒作りをやってた、なんかそういう思い出があります。
Maiko and her team wrap the rice in cloth to keep it warm and humid. After 2 days, they pour it through a grinder to smooth out any clumps. The next step, called bodaimoto, sets Maiko's brewery apart from the competition. While most sake brewers today add sake yeast during fermentation, bodaimoto relies on naturally occurring yeast. It's a method that largely went extinct in the early 1900s, but Gozenshu Brewery has worked hard to bring it back. And it's what Maiko says makes the sake here taste savory.
それをすることによって独特の風味であったりとか奥深い味わいとかそういったものが出せます。あれはもう夢のような味です。
It starts with special rice water, rich with lactic acid. This chemical kills off harmful fungus and creates the perfect environment for yeast to grow. Then workers add steamed rice and some of the koji rice to make the yeast starter called shubo. Then it's time for fermentation. Over 3 weeks, Maiko adds more water, koji rice and steamed rice to the mix. The yeast from the shubo will convert the sugars into alcohol. Maintaining a consistent temperature is critical at this stage, as sake can ferment only between 0 and 12 degrees Celsius. So, Maiko and her team check the temperature twice a day. She knows the mash is ready when it begins to smell fruity. The mash is then pressed and filtered through this machine.
フィルターのようなものにそのもろみを通して透明になった液体お酒とあと酒粕に分けていきます。
But before the sake can hit the shelves, Maiko takes samples to her lab for analysis. Here she tests for acidity and alcohol levels right after fermentation.
その作ったお酒をお客さんが飲んでくれて美味しいと言ってくれた時にこの仕事をやってよかったなと思います。
The art of turning rice into alcohol dates back 7,000 years to ancient China. It came to Japan in the 3rd century BC. At first, Japan's imperial court made and regulated sake. Only officials and religious leaders could drink it. But the fall of the imperial court in the 12th century made the drink more accessible. By the 17th century, there were more than 27,000 brewers across Japan. The sake industry's peak came in the 1970s when machines and factories allowed for mass production of the drink. But demand for sake has dropped as Japan's aging population drinks less and younger people opt for other beverages like beer and wine. From 1973 to 2022, yearly domestic sake sales fell by 76%.
日本酒業界自体が今落ち込んでるので
Maiko and her team produced 20 different sakes here. She says it's been difficult competing with cheaper breweries for a piece of the market. Traditionally, sake is made with only water, rice, koji and yeast. But rice shortages during World War II caused many breweries to add alcohol to increase their yield and sugar to enhance the flavour. Today, Maiko says cheap sake has taken over the market.
安いお酒を作ったりしたんですけど、やっぱりそれは本物のお酒ではないんですけど。
While the average bottle of sake ranges from $7 to $34, Gozenshu's premium sake can cost up to $200. Maiko says most people can't taste the difference between the high-quality drink and ones with additives. Meanwhile, artisanal brewers like her have found it hard to keep up.
値段の競争をしてもうちには勝ち目がないので
Maiko decided the best way to survive was to keep her focus on quality and tradition.
きちんと本物のお酒を作ればそれを分かってくれる人が買ってくださるので
Slowly, she's seen more and more customers looking for her sake, and today, 10% of her sales come from buyers abroad. And she's not the only brewer experiencing this. While demand for sake has been dropping in Japan, it's growing in other markets like the US, Europe, and other Asian countries. In 2022, Japan's sake export sales surpassed $300 million, reaching a record high for the 13th year in a row.
例えば海外の方に飲んでいただいたりとか、あとは若い方の中でも日本酒に興味を持っている人がいるので、そういう方が本当に業界としては希望の光というか。
Local bar owner Koji Soda says Michael's sake has also become a favorite among his customers.
複雑な香りと旨味でキレもあって、でまた僕自身の、一番好きなお酒。
そうです。やはりその他の日本酒よりも特に和食に合うことと、
どんどんこうさっぱりとしてくる。お料理と相性がいいから、お料理の味も引き立ててくれて、日本酒感もちゃんとある。ちょうどいいお酒だと思います。
水のように飲めるんで、それぐらい美味しいかなと。
Koji hopes more people will appreciate the importance of sake to Japan's culture.
ロンドンで世界の人たちに感じてもらいたいなと思っています。うちのお店ではお店が続く限り日本酒は取り扱い続けると思います。
Michael's sake has also received recognition across the country. In 2022, the brewery's bestseller, Mimasaka, won first place at a sake fair in Japan.
ちょっと泣きそうになりました。嬉しかったです。
이 소리를 들어보면은 이 약간 둔탁한 소리가 나거든요. 퍽퍽퍽 약간. 근데 지금 이거는 내가 캔돌인데 이거는 두들겨 보면은 이게 맑은, 그래도 이거는 퍽퍽 소리가 이건 맑은 소리가 나죠. 요거는 좋은 돌이에요. 벼루로 쓸 수 딱 좋은 돌이에요.
The process of creating these expensive inkstones starts here, just 12 kilometers away from Hyuk-soo's workshop in Jincheon, South Korea. This is where he collects the red stone for his prized calligraphy inkstones.
아, 이거 돌은 좋은데 너무 커. 가져가고 싶은데.
Hyuk-soo avoids stones that have been exposed to air as they make for poor inkstones. It's important that the stone isn't cracked and the surface is as uniform as possible. The type of stone Hyuk-soo uses, Sangsan Jasok, is only available here. When he finds a stone that meets all of his qualifications and is easy enough to lift, he heads back to his workshop in Jincheon. Now, he can start the slow and grueling process of transforming it into a sellable inkstone. Hyuk-soo must first saw the stone into the size he desires. He does this the traditional way. No chainsaws or power tools, just physical force and a handsaw. To avoid injuring himself or damaging the stone, he secures it tightly.
고정시켜주는 거예요, 이렇게. 움직이지 않게.
It's too hard to do alone, so Hyuk-soo's friend assists.
스티치 살면서 그 형님이신데 제 일을 많이 도와주고 있지요.
They push and pull the saw until it's a little over an inch deep, where Hyuk-soo can begin to chip away at the parts he doesn't need. But manipulating this rock doesn't get any easier. Hyuk-soo's only tools are chisels, grinding stones, and brushes for dusting debris.
그럼 이걸 날을 또 세워줘야 되잖아요. 그 날을 세우려면 옛날에 낫도 그렇고 다 도구를 다 이 숫돌에 갈았잖아요. 이 숫돌에 갈아서 쓰는 거예요. 이 숫돌 처음 봐요?
네, 저는 처음 봐요.
아, 도시분이시구나. 시골에 이거 다 많이 썼어요.
He does every part of the process with his hands and shoulders. A beautiful inkstone is more valuable, so Hyuk-soo micromanages every step to make sure no flaws show up in the finished product. He flattens the bottom so it's perfectly level. Trying to fix it later will risk damaging the design he'll engrave into the other side. Most inkstones have three basic elements: a flat surface to rub the ink stick, a groove where the ink accumulates, and a border where artisans create designs. The flat grinding surface slopes into the collection pool, so the water and ground ink can flow easily. This shape is vital to the inkstone's functionality and value, so it must be perfected.
손 힘으로만 안 되니까 그 힘이 모자르니까 그 어깨로 밀어서 그 힘을 내는 거죠. 오래 하면은 괜찮아요. 굳은 살들리고 하면은. 아, 어깨가 아무래도 뭐 벌겋게 그 멍도 들고 아프고 그랬죠.
After countless hours of chiseling and scraping, millimeter by millimeter, the surface is complete. Now it's time for the border. Today, Hyuk-soo is working on a relatively simple design, plum blossoms.
아, 이제 요런 꽃잎 같은데 그 꽃잎을 만들려면은 그 테두리가 얇은데 그런 데에 그 조심해서 다뤄야지 그렇지 않으면 아무래도 저 흠집이 생기죠.
He engraves every minute detail along the border. More intricate designs require more labour and time, so they're more expensive. But while the hardest part is done, Hyuk-soo says the inkstone is not yet worthy of a high price. That happens during polishing, which gives the inkstone its most important property, being smooth yet sharp. Hyuk-soo uses an abrasive stone and sandpaper to polish the inkstone. This creates an overall smooth look, but Hyuk-soo says the process also sharpens the outer layer of stone particles. That way, the stone can grind the ink stick into a fine powder.
그게 복망의 가장 별의 생명이죠.
The sharpness of the stone particles directly impacts how well the inkstone performs, and in turn, its final value.
이 사진이 20배 확대해서 본 사진인데 요 돌 그 입자가 여기 환하게 보이죠. 요게 이거 잘 서 있느냐 덜 서 있느냐에 따라서 벼루가 잘 갈리는 겁니다. 이 복망이 잘 서야 벼루가 잘 갈리고 그래 이게 복망이 안 서면은 먹이 안 갈립니다.
Once he's satisfied with the result, Hyuk-soo applies lacquer for protection and longevity. The inkstone is now ready for sale and use by calligraphers. Vincent Chong is a contemporary calligraphy artist. They use inkstones and inksticks for some of their work, even though liquid ink is popular with modern calligraphers due to its ease of use.
The first thing that I think of is either the sound or the smell of grinding ink.
Vincent says inkstones allow for a level of control that bottled ink can't offer.
So using an inkstone allows you to really tailor the quality of the ink to exactly what you want to do, and it also just seems to work out better always. And whatever additional stuff is in a bottle of ink just isn't quite as nice on the paper. I think at this point you can sort of see that the laborious quality of this process creates some energetic or psychological feeling of preciousness with this little bead of ink that you've worked so diligently to produce, which I guess just makes, just makes the experience feel more special.
While Vincent isn't in the position to buy a multi-$1,000 inkstone at the moment, it's something they aspire to.
Yeah, I feel like it would give you this sort of energetic connection to another craftsperson, another artist. And in that regard, I think it just makes the experience a little more special, because so much care has been taken on the part of that artisan just so that you can have this really special experience of your own, in your own art practice, of your own sort of creative, generative kind of practice. I guess that's a little bit scary to use something that's so precious, but it's funny because we're talking so specifically about rocks, and stones have been just around for such a long time, and humans have had this sort of fascination with them for such a long time, that treating them preciously feels really natural, but at the same time, they have this life, and you should sort of allow them to engage with other parts of the physical world in a way that, gives them the generosity that they deserve, having been around so long.
Hyuk-soo similarly admires the preciousness of the stones. He appreciates the properties of Sangsan jasok that make it invaluable to his work and craft.
이게 이제 물속에 있는 돌인데 이게 물속에서 건진 거지요. 이게 물에서 얼마 동안 있었는지를 모르잖아요. 한 달이 있었는지 1년이 있었는지. 보이시죠? 여기 지금 물기가 하나도 없잖아요. 이게 물을 절대 흡수를 안 한다는 거죠. 이 돌이. 상산 자석.
Sangsan jasok inkstones were considered a luxury product during the Joseon dynasty, which began around 1400. But production died down during the Japanese colonization of Korea in the 1910s. But Hyuk-soo, a third-generation master and one of 4 remaining inkstone artisans in Korea, is putting it back on the map.
스승님께서 2000년도에 여기서 만드시다가 예주로 가시는 바람에 이 상산 자석이 없어지게 됐어요. 그때 생각에는 먹고 사는 데는 지장이 없겠구나 하는 생각에서 시작을 하게 된 거죠. 그러다가 이제 점점 사양길에 들고 그러다 보니까 이제 중간에 그만두게 됐던 거죠. 그래도 제 와이프가 생활 전선에 나서서 도와주는 바람에 이때까지 하게 된 거죠. 상산 자석이라는 유명한 돌이 참 이름이 없어진다는 것에 대해서 안타까웠는데 그래도 제가 이 맥을 입고 있다는데 보람을 느끼고 있죠.
While much of the inkstone industry has been mechanized, Hyuk-soo believes the only way to keep Sangsan jasok inkstones alive is by making them by hand. And for contemporary calligraphers like Vincent, this tradition is a constant source of inspiration as they make their own space in the long and continuing history of calligraphy.
Being able to reconnect with the brush marks and thus sort of like the bodily gestures of artists of the past, I think was restorative in a way that helped me feel connected to this artistic lineage and culture. Especially as queer and trans people, I feel like it feels so clear that our communities have been at the heart of artistic communities for all of human history, whether or not we've been erased, whether or not our stories have been passed down. So being able to sort of access those artists who, maybe had, maybe were queer or trans, but we just don't have those stories today. I think being able to access their work through calligraphy was sort of one of the things that drew me to the practice.
Arif Usman, a retired teacher, is visiting Subandi at his workshop in Solo, Central Java.
Keris untuk dari leluhur kita, jadinya kita harus punya lah.
This style of dagger is centuries old. Its use as a weapon is immortalized on the walls of Hindu temples dating back to the 9th century. Over time, it became a physical reminder of Javanese history, and people maintained the belief that the daggers connected them to the spiritual world. Now, the kris is incorporated into weddings and funerals, and is passed down as an heirloom that connects modern generations to past ones.
Oh, saya percaya. Apalagi kita orang untuk pegangan di rumah supaya keluarga adem ayem gitu.
But before forging can begin, an empu has to perform certain rituals. As part of his preparation, he consumes only rice and water for 3 days, a period of fasting known as muti.
Karena apa? Tuhan itu tidak memberikan kita semuanya tidak gratis. Harus ada lakunya.
Before he begins, an assortment of offerings is prepared by his daughter, Seppa. While not directly involved in making daggers, she has focused her master's photography thesis on kris.
Kalau untuk saat ini sih belum, mungkin suatu saat nanti pengen dibikinin Bapak sesuai dengan karakteristik saya sebagai turunan leluhur atau sebagai mungkin doa dari Bapak untuk saya ke depannya. Mungkin seperti itu sih.
Yang baik mestinya tahapan-tahapan yang pembuatan. Oh ini misalnya berdoa, tidak hanya sekedar ucapan saja, juga nganggo menggagai puasa laku. Nama orang Jawa itu laku.
The physical process begins with a fire, which can reach temperatures of up to 1200 degrees Celsius. Using teak charcoal as the base.
Nempah, soalnya panasnya itu.
Subandi's 23-year-old son, Dana, hopes to take over the family business one day. He's one of a handful of apprentices in the workshop, but training a new generation of empus is proving difficult. Dana says he, like a lot of young people in Indonesia, had no desire at first to become a kris master.
Dulu sebelumnya sih nggak ada sama sekali ketertarikan masuk dunia keris. Sebenarnya 5 bulan baruan. Soalnya sebelumnya saya bekerja di tempat resto Solo. Karena juga ingin nerusin usaha bapak, karena anak satu-satunya juga, pengen berusaha bahagiain bapak.
Subandi begins by heating a single slab of iron. Folding it in half and inserting a thin piece of nickel. He then hammers the two metals together into one mass. There are two basic shapes to a kris, curved and straight.
Tipe look 3 yang pamornya bagus.
A curved dagger usually has an odd number of curves, or looks. The pamor is the swirly pattern that forms on the surface of the blade as a result of welding together layers and layers of iron and nickel. Part of being considered a master is knowing how many layers of nickel and iron to use to create the pamor pattern the buyer wants.
Nah, soal jumlahnya, kita menyesuaikan bentuk pamor yang akan diinginkan. Jadi setiap pamor itu belum tentu, artinya tidak sama lapisannya.
He heats up the metal again in the fire until it glows red hot. Dana and the others then take turns hammering the molten metal together. The mass is then heated and folded in half again. They repeat this over and over, multiplying the number of layers with each fold. A laborious and time-consuming process.
Paling memuaskan itu apa, keluar kembang apinya itu.
The multi-layered piece is folded once more before steel is welded into the core. At this point, Subandi will either hammer in the basic curves or leave it straight, depending on the desired shape. Finally, he immerses the dagger in water adorned with a ceremonial blend of flowers known as Kembang 7 Rupa. This process quenches and hardens the newly forged steel. Now, it's time to shape and furrow the blade. This is the most difficult part of the process, according to Subandi's apprentice, Agus.
Karena kalau kita salah sedikit dah jadi.
Subandi uses tools like an emery wheel or a grindstone to sharpen the edges and carve out the final design of the barmor. Dana is learning how to do this detailing, which has already resulted in a trip to the hospital.
Kebetulan kemarin waktu saya ngerinda itu ada gram besi yang masuk ke mata. Dan akhirnya memutuskan ke dokter mata dan alhamdulillah sudah sembuh.
To accentuate the barmor design, Subandi brushes the blade with a liquid mixture containing arsenic.
Nah, untuk memunculkan yang di Jawa itu terkenal dengan warangan itu, memunculkan itu adalah menggunakan asam.
The sheath and handles are carved from other materials like wood, bone, or metal. The material of the handle can affect the final price. Most of Subandi's customers are local Javanese people like Arif, who are familiar with Kris culture. Subandi says demand for authentic Kris daggers is growing. The problem is there simply aren't enough people qualified to make them.
Selama ini, akhir-akhir ini, setiap bulan ada.
There are not many traditional empus like Subandi left in the country, which is why he is determined to pass on the skills to younger generations, like his son, Danar. But Subandi says there is still a lot to learn before Danar can become an empu.
Ya, karena tidak menjamin saya menjadi kemampuan. Tadi harus dari Bapak Empu itu adalah kemampuan.
Subandi started learning to make daggers in 1979 at the suggestion of the chairman of the Indonesian Classical Arts Academy, who was interested in reinvigorating Kris production.
Selamat siang, Mas. Monggo, ini Mas Joko.
Subandi went on to teach at the state-run Indonesian Institute of the Arts Surakarta, where he trains younger apprentices. Muhammad is a student in the Kris program Subandi teaches. Both he and his classmate Joko say they want to become empus one day.
Yaitu di kalangan anak muda sekarang kan sudah meninggalkan tradisi-tradisinya, yaitu terutama di berkerisan. Mempertahankan budaya berkerisan.
Masyarakat yang mencintai budaya, apalagi sekarang bahwa budaya asli Indonesia kan juga mendapat tekanan-tekanan dari luar. Mungkin juga ada istilah mungkin atau mematikan budaya-budaya tradisi bangsa kan gitu ada. Gitu.
Even with recent revitalization efforts, knowledge of how to make Kris daggers is at risk of disappearing as young people choose higher paying jobs in modern industries. In 2005, the United Nations gave Kris daggers intangible cultural heritage status alongside other art forms under threat.
Kita sebagai seniman kalau idealis dengan karya doang kita nggak bisa makan, tetap ke ekonomis.
While Subandi may be one of the only empus left in Solo, his work has had a big impact on the youth around him. And it's not just men looking to become empus.
Pernah angkatan keberapa itu 8 atau itu kebanyakan malah perempuan, dari cowoknya lebih banyak ceweknya.
Ada, karena beberapa mahasiswanya Bapak itu sering ke rumah. Suatu saat nanti kalau pengen sih dibikinkan untuk keris wanita biasanya. Namanya cundri, jadi untuk ukurannya lebih kecil.
And students like Muhammad are stepping into the empu role to help keep the tradition alive.
Menurut saya itu kesempatan untuk di kalangan anak muda yang sekarang yang tetap mempertahankan nilai budaya, terutama di Indonesia sendiri. Kan banyak yang harus tetap dilestarikan. Kalau bukan anak-anak muda sekarang, nanti siapa lagi?